I was scraping a living working as a security guard. I was stationed in shopping malls where my days were spent asking teenagers to move on. I sat behind desks in the lobbies of office blocks staring at CCTV monitors where nothing happened for hour after hour. And I patrolled construction sites on freezing cold nights, actually wishing that somebody would try and break in and steal some of the building materials. At least then, I could get warmed up by chasing them. My job was garbage. One night, I was responding to an alarm which had gone off at a lot of a car dealership. I parked up outside. The alarm was flashing, but there was no sign of damage to the building, so I assumed it was yet another waste of time. I stood in front of the window and looked at the sleek, high-performance vehicles on display that cost more than I would earn in a lifetime of my pathetic wage. My reflection peered back at me, a sad figure dressed in a gray security guard's uniform. I sighed, turned away, and headed back to my car. I had left my work phone on the passenger seat. I had to use it to fill in an online form after every call-out before leaving the scene, and I would get my wages docked if I did not complete all the boxes correctly. I felt so futile. I unlocked the car and was reaching for the door handle when I saw movement across the road, a glimpse of something running on all fours. I slipped down an alley and away out of sight. I thought at first that it might have been a fox. There were a small number of exclusive restaurants in the surrounding blocks, and their refuse would be packed with tasty morsels for scavengers. They wouldn't care that it was leftovers from hot cuisine prepared by a chef with his own show on cable TV. But my hand hovered over the door handle. What if it had been a dog? I wondered. A stray destined for the pound that would eventually heartbreakingly be put to sleep. I had always liked dogs a lot. I admired their loyalty and their tenacity, though my circumstances over the years had meant that I had not owned one since I was a teenager. And though I should have got busy filling in the mind-numbing online form, I decided that I could wait. I wanted to see if it was a dog. If it was, maybe I could rescue it and give it a home. That would give my empty life some kind of purpose. And try not to think about how I was going to afford to pay for dog food and veterinarian's bills. I set off on the animal's trail. The alley that I had entered was narrow and dark. I gave my eyes a moment to adjust, and then I carried on. I moved slowly, not wanting to spook the animal. I knew that if it felt threatened, it could lash out, and the last thing that I needed was a trip to the ER to get treated for a bite. But there was no sign of it, and the only sound was a drunk singing in the distance. I shook my head sadly. I would have to give up and get back to the car. There would be another job lined up for me by now, and the supervisor would be wondering where I was at. I turned, but did not take another step. A pair of eyes glowed in the darkness ahead of me. They were red and burning with rage. I could see the snout of the animal now as well, and its teeth. Only they were not the teeth of any kind of dog or fox. They were way too big and way too sharp. They were fangs, and they were coming my way. My guts cramped with fear. I needed to get out of there or stand and fight. I clenched my fists. The animal was close and began to snarl and crouch. I realized with horror that it was about to go for me. Suddenly the alley was filled with the sound of screeching tires and an engine roaring like it was fit to burst. A car sped into view. It was backing in and barely fit into the cramped space. Its sides scraped along the sides of the alley with a sickening screech, and then it slammed to a halt. I heard a door open and a man stepped out of the driver's seat. He wore a battered leather coat that reached almost to his ankles. A fedora was balanced at a rakish angle on his head. He smiled, and I saw a glint of a gold tooth. "Well, howdy," he said it to me. I'll take it from here." The animal had not moved since he had arrived in the scene. It had remained low to the ground, its teeth bared, its hackles raised. The man stood tall before it, patted a holster on his hip and said, "I got 6 silver pieces in here. I'm only gonna need 1. There will be no mourning after regrets then. The only thing waiting for you will be a cold, hard grave." It was insane. He was speaking to a crazed animal as if it could understand him. The animal responded with a howl and then it leapt at him. Moving with lightning speed and agility, the man rolled out of the way and was back on his feet in a flash. He drew and a loud retort filled the alley, all while the animal was still in midair. The impact of the projectile sent it spiraling down. It hit the ground heavily and it did not move. I stood there transfixed, barely able to breathe. The man opened the trunk of his car, picked the animal up, and placed it inside. As he closed the trunk, I could swear that I saw pale human skin appearing beneath the animal's fur. The man turned back to me. "Word of advice, stranger. Stay out of dark alleys on nights like these. The full moon's real pretty, but she brings out the beast." And then he tapped the brim of his fedora in a relaxed salute and climbed back into his car. I was left standing watching open-mouthed as he drove away. I hadn't noticed that it was a full moon, but when I looked up, I saw it burning bright in the dark city night. I took a deep breath and I headed back to my car. There were missed calls on my work phone and a red-flagged email telling me to report to personnel in the morning. I didn't tell the drone in the suit who I met in the security company's headquarters at 9:30 the next day what had happened in the alley. I knew that that was pointless. There was no way that he would believe me, and it turned out the damage was already done. I listened as he told me that I was fired for taking an unauthorized break. It took all my self-control not to reach over the desk, grab him, and tell him exactly what I thought of his organization and his stupid face. With my head held high, I walked out onto the street. I had my dignity but nothing else. I was unemployed and close to broke. I needed to think. I decided it was too early to go to the bar and consider my options over a stiff drink, and my cramped apartment was the last place that I wanted to be when I was already feeling down. So I set off walking. I had no destination in mind, I just drifted. As I paced the streets, my mood got bleaker and bleaker. I could not see a way out of the dire situation that I was in. Finally, as dusk fell, I gave in to the temptation of a drink. There was a bar on the corner. It had no windows and there was broken glass and cigarette ends scattered across the sidewalk in front of it. It was a dive. Ideal for a loser like me, that I figured, and I headed in. The inside of the bar was hazy with smoke and dimly lit by a fluorescent strip that was dancing with flies. There were half a dozen patrons nursing beers, and a jukebox playing a song about looking for love. The only thing anybody was going to find in this place was regret and stale breath. I headed to the bar and ordered a double bourbon neat. The barman slid over a glass and poured out the drink. The rim of the glass had more fingerprints on it than a crime scene. Telling myself that alcohol was a very effective disinfectant, I downed the bourbon in one and then turned to leave. Call it the ambience, call it the dirty looks that I was getting because my eyebrows did not meet in the middle. But this bar was not helping my mood one little bit. I was almost back at the door when it swung open and the man from the alley had strolled in. His fedora, long leather coat, and confident strut made him stand out a mile in the seedy bar. He looked at me and I saw recognition in his eyes, but he carried on right by me without a word and made his way towards a lone figure sitting at a corner table. I had paid this man no heed before. He was keeping to the shadows, and even as he was approached, he had eyes only for the drink that sat in front of him. Common sense was telling me that there was about to be trouble and that I should leave. But I had not ended up one step away from the gutter by listening to my common sense. So I leaned against a wall and watched and waited. The man wearing the fedora had reached the table. He had his back to me, but I imagined a gold tooth glinting as he said, "It's time to end this." His voice was calm and cold. He meant business. The lone figure responded by taking a long drink, then placing his glass back down slowly and deliberately. The sound of the glass clinking on the tabletop was the loudest sound in the bar by now. The jukebox was silent and everybody else in there seemed transfixed by the encounter as well. The lone figure got to his feet. He was slender and dressed all in black. In the gloom, his eyes were 2 points of darkness, and his skin looked drained of all color. And then he smiled and I felt a cold chill run through my body. The tips of his teeth were viciously sharp points. Had he filed them down to be like that, I wondered, or was there another explanation? One that belonged far from the light of day in a dank, dark place like this. The lone figure kept smiling as he said, "That's not going to happen. It's night now, so I'll be leaving here to get myself a drink that satisfies my thirst. The plasma they keep behind the bar for me here just doesn't cut it. In fact, this whole situation lacks bite." And then he snarled and his jaws snapped open. His grotesque teeth looked like a steel trap, one that was about to close around the neck of the man in the fedora. But once again he moved at speed, producing a sharp wooden stake from inside of his leather coat and striking it into the heart of the lone figure, who screamed and then crumbled into dust. The man in the fedora turned to walk away. Only his path to the door was blocked by the barman. He held his sawed off. "You shouldn't have done that," he said. "Vampires are my best customers." And then he let loose with both barrels. There was nothing that the man in the fedora could do. He was sent flying backwards, crashing through chairs and tables before sliding to a halt. Appalled at all of this, I threw myself at the barman and knocked him out with a right hook. And then I scrambled over to the man in the fedora. He was in a bad way, but he was still breathing. His eyes flickered open. I forced a reassuring smile onto my face and said, "Don't try and move. I'll call 911. "No, there will be too many questions." He gasped and tried to sit up. His face contorted with pain and he swore. And then through gritted teeth he said, "Help me get out of here." I had no idea what he was talking about and still thought about calling the authorities. It was the best thing to do. But I saw that the other customers were giving us filthy looks and that the barman was coming around. I decided that getting out of there as soon as possible was the wisest option after all. I helped the man in the fedora get to his feet and took as much of his weight as I could as we struggled towards the door and out into the night. I recognized his car parked across from the bar. He gave me the keys and collapsed into the passenger seat. I was about to tell him that I was not insured to drive his vehicle when I saw the door of the bar open and the barman emerge. Getting pulled over for a traffic offense was small change compared to the volley that was about to come our way. So I dived into the car, gunned the engine, and gripped the wheel as we sped away. I almost hit a car at the next intersection, but I swerved just in time. My heart was beating way too fast and I was coated in sweat. And then the headlights of a truck filled my line of vision and its horn blasted out a warning. It missed us by inches. I couldn't take it anymore. I pulled up at the side of the road and sat there shaking. I glanced over at the man in the fedora and was amazed to see that he was grinning. "What in Hades' name is going on?" I snapped. "I'm a freelance operative," he replied. "I'm paid by the government to eliminate monsters." I looked at him, lost for words. "It sounds crazy, I know," he continued, "but I assure you that I don't need a straitjacket. Just one more favor." I live a couple of blocks from here. I'm figuring it would be safer to walk the rest of the way, and while my Kevlar vest soaked up most of the blast, I'm still in a world of pain." He left it hanging there. I sighed and then told him that I would help him get home, but that was it. A day that had started with me being fired had descended into chaos and my nerves were shredded. With him leaning on me, we made our way slowly through the streets, until finally we reached what looked to me like a derelict warehouse. Even though it was late, a steady stream of traffic passed by. This city never slept. "This is my place," he said, while unlocking the door with a big brass key. The door opened with a creak and I helped him inside. He flicked a light switch on, revealing a long open plan room that was a strange mix of a workshop and a living space. An old and very comfortable looking sofa sat in front of a TV that looked about 30 years old. There was a fridge and nearby a stove and a sink that was piled high with dishes. A toolbox stood open on the floor near to the sink, and a wide wooden workbench ran along the side of one wall. There was an unmade bed as well and an empty clothes hanger. Rumpled clothes lay scattered across the floor. "I'm guessing you live here alone," I said. He shrugged and responded with, "Wherever I lay my stakes, and that's my home." I thought that he was joking until I saw the row of wooden stakes lined up against the wall. The tip of each was sharpened, just like the one he had used in the bar. He tapped the nearest one and said, "I like to keep plenty of replacements. I always seem to be leaving things behind." And then he made his way over to the sofa and sunk down onto it. I could see that he was still in a lot of pain, but his breathing was irregular, and as I watched his eyelids close, he started to snore quietly. It was time for me to make my exit. Only I could hear the rain falling heavily against the roof of the building. It sounded filthy outside, and I was beat. There was an armchair in one corner of the room. It looked ancient, and the lining was split open in a bunch of places. But at that moment in time, it also looked incredibly comfortable. I dragged myself over and pretty much collapsed onto it. I don't even remember closing my eyes. The next thing I knew, I was blinking and yawning and rubbing my face. The morning sun was reaching into the room from a skylight, and there was a pot of coffee brewing on the stove. There was also a fax machine whirring into life. I thought they had gone the way of the dinosaur, so I was bemused by the spectacle as a printout had appeared. I went over to see what was on the sheet of paper. It was a two-tone reproduction of a mugshot. Whoever it was not going to win any beauty contests. He looked desperate and dangerous. He also appeared human. But I assumed there was more to him than met the eye, if he was of interest to a monster hunter. Below the picture there was a $sign followed by 4 figures. I whistled quietly to myself. To a man in my dire financial straits, it was a substantial sum. I was thinking how having that kind of money in my pocket would have made my life a whole lot better, when the man who I had helped the night before came into the room. He took the printout from me, studied it, and then said, "Looks like it's time for me to go back to work." His leather coat and fedora were on the floor. He started to bend over to pick them up, but he pulled up in pain. "Look," I said, "if I understand this right, and you're going to try and take out that desperado for that fee, then I would say that you're going to fail. I reckon at best that you've cracked a couple of ribs. What you need is a partner, with a 50-50 split of the money when we succeed." He didn't look happy about my suggestion and replied, "It will be dangerous in the extreme. You must realize that after seeing the last couple of vermin that I took out." Unease trickled through me, but I wasn't going to be put off that easily. I really wanted the money. I pointed at the mugshot and I asked, "What kind of monster is this?" He grabbed a second page that had appeared from the fax machine, read it, and then told me. It says that he's a shapeshifter. He's more dangerous than the lycanthrope that I killed in the alley because he can change at will, not just during the full moon. And he could well share the cold logic of the vampire from the bar. The amount of the fee reflects this. I swallowed and tried to pretend like I was not scared as I said, "My offer to partner up with you still stands." He felt his ribs and then looked me in the eye and growled, "Let's do this thing." He drove this time, wincing every time that we hit a pothole. I had the 2 printouts on my lap and I was leafing through an old A to Z of the city. I was looking for the street name that was among the details provided on the second sheet of paper. "You do know that it's much easier to do this online," I told him as yet another bump in the road made me lose my page. "Easier but risky," he told me. "Emails and messaging services are frequently hacked, but no one is looking for information sent by fax. And who's to say that somebody isn't looking at the results of your internet searches the moment that you bring them up? I guess you don't trust money being wired into banks either. So how do you get paid?" I said with a cynical tone. He replied without missing a beat. "In cash, used notes, collected from drop-off points and never the same place. Do you like being given cash in hand? I know I do." I had to smile, he had me there. I went back to the A to Z. After a couple of unnecessary detours caused by my rusty map reading, we finally turned into the right street. The apartment block that we were looking for was on our left. Finding monsters in alleys and dive bars had made sense. I also assumed monsters would hang out in graveyards, crumbling mansions, and other generally creepy and run-down locations. As I climbed out of the car and looked up, I was surprised. The apartment block was sleek and modern. Balconies extended below each window. The views from the upper ones must have been stunning, and back down at ground level there was no graffiti or trash anywhere in sight. "Are you sure this is the right place?" I asked. He looked at me and said, "The facts never lies." Then, hiding his pain behind a swagger, he strode up to the entrance and pressed a bunch of intercom buttons all at once. "Somebody's bound to be expecting a delivery," he said, and sure enough, we were buzzed in straight away. We made our way through the plush lobby and waited on the elevator. The details that we had been given also told us the shapeshifter lived in the penthouse suite. "It must be profitable being a monster," I said as the display showed the elevator descending. The man in the fedora kept his attention on the display as he replied, "For some it can be. They use their differences to gather fortunes and power, sometimes through deluded acolytes, sometimes through violence and cunning. For others, though, being different is a curse, pure and simple. They wallow in filth, driven by base instincts to feed and hide. Either way, it's only a matter of time before they're identified as monsters and an operative is sent to end them." The elevator arrived and the door slid open. The interior was wallpapered and there was a small ornate sofa on one side. More signs that the shapeshifter had clearly done very well for himself. That was all about to change. The elevator ride was smooth and swift, and we emerged into a corridor where our boots sank into a thick white carpet. Out of the corner of my eye, I noticed a security camera fixed high on the wall turned to face us. I pointed it out and whispered, "Motion activated." The man in the fedora drew and obliterated the camera. "Not anymore," he said and walked up to the door leading to the penthouse. "It's over," he yelled and then slammed his boot into the door. I noticed for the first time that he had steel toe caps and steel heels. The door cracked and he forced it open and stepped inside. I followed. I could feel the adrenaline pushing my fear away. The downtrodden security guard was history. I was a monster hunter's partner now. The vestibule of the penthouse was larger than any of the rooms in my apartment. There were oil paintings on the wall and light fittings that sparkled like jewels. A door opened up off it. The man in the fedora was already barging through it. I hurried after him into a living room with a floor-to-ceiling window. High rises soared in the distance. A man sat in an antique chair in one corner of the room. I recognized him from the mugshot. He had an arrogant sneer on his face, an arrogance that spread to his voice when he said, "Breaking into my home was a mistake. The last one you will ever make." And then he rose to his feet and began to change. His entire body expanded, and within seconds he loomed over us. His skin cracked and dark fur began to appear. His fingers split open and claws unfurled, and the sneering face that looked down at us was now that of a beast. It growled and with dizzying speed went for the man in the fedora. He made to draw, but his injuries must have slowed him because the shapeshifter reached him before he could. The shapeshifter lashed out with one of its claw-tipped paws, and the man in the fedora was sent flying across the room. He lay there looking dazed. His leather coat and Kevlar vest were ripped and blood was seeping out. The shapeshifter raised its claws, ready to inflict a fatal blow. I had to act. I grabbed a chair and swung this at the shapeshifter. It turned and smashed the chair out of my grip. I was left standing there as the shapeshifter snarled at me. The only thing that I had achieved was to move up the victim chain. I would be diced and sliced and left as a mess on the floor. My life flashed before my eyes, and I felt sick to the core as I realized what my last thought would be. I have wasted my time on this earth. But then something whipped into sight, a blur of silver. The shapeshifter looked confused, then its head toppled to the floor. The man in the fedora dragged himself into view. He was holding a silver boomerang. "An excellent weapon," he drawled. "Portable with an edge that will cut through most anything and very loyal. It always comes back." The head was already changing back into that of a man, a very dead man. I turned away and was violently sick. By the time that I had recovered, the man in the fedora had left the room. I ran after him and called out, "Do we still have a deal? I get half of the fee." He was stepping into the elevator and did not turn around as he replied, "Yeah, sure, I'm going to collect it now. I'll meet you later and hand over your share. Be at the alley where we first met at midnight, and don't be late." The door slid closed behind him, and I punched the air and said, "Yes." I was too wired to head home or go for a drink, so once again, I found myself pacing the streets. I was excited at the prospect of the cash coming my way, but I wanted more than a payoff. I wanted to be back on the trail of a monster. I wanted the rush of the confrontation, the elation of victory. Sure, I was green and I knew there was no way that I could strike out on my own, but the way forward was obvious. I had persuaded the man in the fedora to partner up with me once, and I would do that again. I was still telling myself that as I waited for him in the alley. It was 5 minutes to midnight. And then midnight came and went, and there was no sign of him. I told myself not to worry. He would be there soon with my money, and I would seize my opportunity to change my life forever. But by 1 a.m., I was still alone. I cursed the man in the fedora. Did he think that he could rip me off? Well, there was no way that I was going to let that happen. I set off for his base. It took me hours to get there on foot, and I was exhausted but still furious, until I saw that his door was hanging open. I knew that someone as security conscious as him would never have left it like that, and my anger had dissipated. My nerves tingling with dread, I slipped inside, to be met by a shocking sight. The man in the fedora was lying on the floor in a pool of blood. "No!" I cried out and ran forwards. I knelt next to him and tried to find a pulse, but there was nothing. I began to weep, and as I did so, laughter drifted from the edge of the room. I span around. A tall, pale figure dressed all in black walked into view. His eyes were pools of darkness. My mind flashed back to the lone figure in the bar. The vampire. Was this his kin? You did this. I spat the accusation out. The pale figure smiled. I took my revenge. I was shaking as I screamed at him. You murderer. The pale figure shook his head. No, I did not kill him, because there are worse things than death that I can inflict. You will see. And then he walked away out into the night. My mind was racing. I needed to do something, but what? I decided that I should take care of the body first. It was an empty shell now, but I still wanted to treat it with respect. I grabbed a towel from among the things on the floor and began to clean away the blood. I stopped when I saw 2 wounds on the neck. They were small and deep, and I knew in my heart what they were. Bite marks. I recalled the vampire's words. There are worse things than death I can inflict. And now when I looked down at the man in the fedora's chest, I could see that it was moving. This was so slight that it was no wonder I had missed it, but there was no question now. He was not dead. He was undead. I knelt there and watched as his chest rose and fell as his eyes opened. I could see the pain in them, the confusion. What happened? He asked, his voice very faint. I told him there was no point in lying, no way back, and he knew that better than me. I can't exist like this, as a monster, he said in a quiet, wary voice. And then he asked me to help him get up. I supported him as he struggled to his feet. He took off his fedora and handed it to me. It was dawn by now, and the sun was starting to reach into the room through the skylight. He began to move through the shadows that remained towards the still open door. He hesitated for a moment on the threshold, perhaps remembering his own life, perhaps summoning the courage that he needed, and then he stepped outside. Through the gap, I could see the smoke rising from his exposed skin as the sunlight touched him. I closed my eyes. I couldn't bear to watch. I stayed like that for a long time. After a while, I moved over to the sofa and I collapsed onto it. I felt more alone and lost than I ever had in my whole miserable life. The world was infected by evil. How could I find my place in it now that my eyes had been opened to this? At dusk, I made a decision. There was one thing I could do. One thing that I had to do. Take revenge. The need for this burnt white hot inside me. I put the fedora on, picked up a stake, and stepped outside. The rain struck the streets as I stared out into the night. The lights of cars blurred as they passed, and sirens rose and fell in their endless serenade. I took a deep breath. Excitement and fear mingled inside me. It was time to go to work. They'll never tell you about this war. It'll never appear on the news or in the history books. No countries will petition our cause in the UN. We'll never get any aid supplies or vast shipments of weaponry from the government. I doubt the internet will even notice my little post, but I figure it's worth a shot. At least someone out there might find it and try to do something, even if that something is coming down to pick up all the bones once it's over. I suppose by then you won't be able to recognize any of us. That's okay. Just dump us in a pit together and make sure somebody other than the government gets to inherit our stuff. I'm not trying to be tough or melodramatic, just honest. My name is Ethan Sanderson. Right now, I'm sitting around the fire with the others, shoveling down a bowl of unsweetened oatmeal and typing this while I have time. To think my world was sane only a few hours ago, everything normal obliterated in just over 60 awful minutes. There's no way I'll ever get back to my old job, not with the roadblocks during the day and the attacks at night. Nope, I'm here to stay, and so I figure I may as well share my story while this bout of decent cell service lasts. It all started when I was driving home from another round of night shift at the Brighton Smith Petroleum Refinery, tired, covered in grease, and ready for a hot meal before bed. The radio crackled, auto-skimming through various channels, looking for anything other than twangy country music, self-pitying pop songs, or yet another news report yammering on about how close we were to getting to a nuclear war with the Russians. My truck's engine rumbled with a comforting, quiet regularity, and I let myself smile in pride at that. One thing I can do, and that's get an engine running smooth as silk. As an only child, with my father dying from lung cancer when I was 15 and my mother hooked on drugs since I was 12, I had been on my own for most of my life. Engines had been the one thing that I excelled at, school being my nemesis. And after I had fixed up an old F-150 bound for the scrapyard, I took the first oil rig job that I could find and I left town. I had done well for myself, stayed away from the dealers that had wrecked my mom's life, and accumulated enough money to buy a camper, several firearms, and a little solar power setup that allowed me to travel all over the country in relative comfort. Despite never having gone to college, I considered myself successful, and if I ever found a woman who didn't mind the grease on my overalls and wasn't a total lunatic, maybe I would settle down and have kids of my own. Whatever the case, I swore to myself that I would be a better parent than either of mine had been. No cigarettes, no drugs, and no throwing chairs when I was angry. My thoughts were shattered at the sight of several white and orange plastic barricades stretched across the cracked asphalt, completely blocking my pathway. Behind them, two massive slate-gray trucks were parked nose to nose across the roadway, just in case someone did get the bright idea of pushing past the flimsy obstructions. 5 men dressed in similar gray uniforms and carrying shiny black rifles stood around the roadblock, with the 2 more perched in the turrets of the armored trucks, manning belt-fed machine guns. I hadn't seen any signs warning me of construction, and never a road crew with armored vehicles, which made something sour twist in the pit of my stomach. As an inner-city kid from Pittsburgh, I had learned to know when I was in a bad area, and this felt all kinds of bad. Look at Barron County trying to be Chicago. I grunted to myself and slowed to a stop in front of the barricades, waiting for the nearest soldier to walk up to my driver's side window. He approached, rifle at low ready, and I noted the automatic switch on its receiver. Nope, these guys weren't regular civilians out for a LARP. You need serious cash to have that kind of firepower, which meant that I had to be dealing with some branch of our murky federal government. Just stay calm, you've got nothing to hide, and you've done nothing wrong. Play it cool. Hey man, I put on a friendly smile, scratching at my beard and pointing at the roadblock. Is there some kind of accident up ahead? Train derailment. From behind his dark face mask, the soldier casually threw out what must have been a predetermined lie, because I knew there was no rail line near this stretch of road. A real bad one, I'm afraid. We've been tasked with keeping civilians out of the area until it's all clear. Which way you headed? He seemed friendly enough, confident and relaxed, though I noted the beginnings of a tattoo that poked from under his uniform sleeve. Rangers lead the way. Something prickled in the back of my mind, a low warning that had saved me from many a mugging in my younger days. These guys weren't local. They didn't have any identifying patches or marks on their vehicles, and with how nice their gear looked, they weren't here as part of some hazmat team. Besides, if they were so bent on keeping people out, then why was one of the machine gunners facing the road behind them, as if waiting for someone to try and escape the ring of steel? Collingswood. I rested my elbow on the truck window and jerked a thumb back towards the way that I had come. I work at the oil refinery up the road. You guys military? The soldier chuckled and shrugged. Once upon a time, my dude. We're with the cleanup teams providing security. Like I said, there's some bad stuff down this road. Don't want people tracking through it and getting sick. Interesting timing. I haven't even heard about any accident, and yet there's already a cordon. Never saw the government move so fast. Oh, gotcha. I played along, and eyed the rest of them for any symbols that might tell me just who I was dealing with. Well, I'll be honest, this is normally the road that I take home, and it's gonna take me out of my way to go around. You sure I couldn't just... From behind his mask, the man gave out a sympathetic sigh. Sorry, man, I've got my orders. No one passes unless they're official personnel. But hey, it should be all clear in like a few days tops. Putting my truck into reverse, I stuck out my hand, doing my best to put them all at ease and keep the rifles pointed away from my head. Well, hey, thanks for letting me know. I'll tell the other guys at the rig and we'll try to keep out of your hair. I appreciate it. Despite the mask over his face, I could see the ends of his grin as these soldiers shook my hand and the others relaxed, their guns staying pointed toward the ground. Like I said, we'll be gone in a few days at the most, so if anyone starts getting riled up, just let them know that we've got this. Sure you do. I eased backwards into a U-turn and drove until I was well out of sight of the roadblock. As soon as they left my rearview mirror, I killed the lights and drifted into the grassy berm, coming to a stop with a minimal brake squeal. My trailer sat just on the outskirts of Collinswood, in a small, unkempt campground that was free to the public. It should have been a short commute, but the local police had been cutting off a lot of routes lately, for seemingly no reason at all. However, these upgrades at the roadblock weren't the usual sheriff's deputies. I knew a few guys in the refinery who were ex-military, and the soldier at the checkpoint had these same polite, but deadly mannerisms that told me I was dealing with professionals. Whatever was going on out there, they certainly weren't cleaning up a train derailment, especially since there were no train tracks near this road. I wonder what they need to hide so badly that they hire mercs. Pulling out my phone, I checked my Maps app and scanned the spiderweb of small gravel roads around Collinswood for an alternate route. Some of the roads looked so small that I wondered if they would be out of commission, as was the case with many of the neglected coal mining roads in this forgotten part of the Appalachian foothills. Of course, my pickup was four-wheel drive, and if the authorities thought that the road was impassable, then maybe they wouldn't have guarded. But with dawn only an hour away at best, I would have to be quick or risk being spotted in the daylight. There, my eyes caught a road called Bethesda Ridge that ran around a large chunk of land on the map labeled New Wilderness Wildlife Reserve. I had heard a few of the locals in Collinswood talk about that place, how pretty it was in the daylight, full of exotic animals and blooming flowers. I'm not much of a flower guy, but always figured maybe someday I would take a tour to see what all the fuss was about. There had been something in the news a few days ago about some guy named Richter being involved in a scandal connected to the park, but I never paid attention to it. At any rate, this road looked like it should be well maintained, and it would only take me 5 minutes longer than my usual route. With any luck, I would be back in my camper squeaky clean and eating hot ravioli in no time. I followed the directions my phone reliably spat out, winding up and down steep inclines through narrow, overgrown mining roads and past farmhouse after dilapidated farmhouse. It depressed me how this area was so run down, the opioid epidemic really throwing the community for a hard loop. Part of me knew just by looking at the faded paint and sagging roof lines that these buildings had been beautiful ones. But poverty, an indifferent government, and the unending flow of narcotics poisoned that beauty, turning it into something like a theme from some 90s analog horror film. Randy, tell me you're seeing this. Swearing under my breath in surprise, I almost jumped out of my skin and stared at my shortwave walkie-talkie. We used them on the various work sites to communicate between crews, but I didn't recognize this voice. It was a young man and he sounded scared.
Yeah, I see him.
An older man's voice came through low and rough, like he was whispering into his mic.
Hold fire till they get closer.
My curiosity spiked and I slowed, still driving down the bumpy old coal road in the dark. Most people don't know, but even rudimentary shortwave radios sometimes experience a phenomenon called a skip, where the right atmospheric conditions relay radio traffic from somewhere else, sometimes traffic from different frequencies, channels, or even long distances. I had heard messages from as far away as California before, so it didn't surprise me that I could still get radio signals like this. Still, they were so clear, so loud, that whoever was talking had to be close by, within 20 miles at least.
My God.
A woman's voice came through, shocked and tense, as if she were watching a building full of children collapse.
There's so many, Randy. What do we...
Stay calm, the older man barked back, and I got the feeling that he had some background in police or military, with the way that he seemed to take command of the situation.
Just stay put and conserve your ammo. We'll be fine.
Head cocked in confusion, I almost didn't look up in time, and slammed my boot down on the brake pedal. Mud sloshed under the knobby tread of my truck tires, and brown fur blurred past my headlights. Stunned, I watched in wide-eyed fascination as no less than 50 white-tailed deer bounded across the decrepit road at full speed, not even paying attention to my rumbling truck. Birds darted overhead, and not just owls and crows, but all manner of daytime birds as well. Pigeons, sparrows, songbirds, and even bats. Tens of thousands of bugs seethed over the dirt in dark sheets of wriggling legs, parting to allow the stampede of possums, raccoons, red foxes, and even a pack of coyotes to flee past them like a tidal wave was hot on their tails. Neither stopped to attack each other, prey and predator running together, all with their ears laid back, limbs moving at breakneck speed without a glance backward. What the? I had never seen animals act like this, not once in all my travels across the U.S. Something seemed to have spooked them, something bad enough that even the insects weren't hanging around to weather the storm.
Now.
Milliseconds after the old man's voice echoed through the radio, a bright flash lit up the horizon to my left, and a huge fiery orange ball rose from behind the hills bordering the road. My truck rocked, the shock wave rippled through the ground even from this far away, and I ducked out of reflex. What the heck is going on here? My heart roared in my ear and I pushed the accelerator to the floor, weaving through the horde of wildlife to fly down the dark road like a bat out of there. Take the next left. The map app on my phone chirped in its neutral, pleasant voice, and I drifted around the turn without even slowing down. Spare sockets for my tool set, rolling over the floorboard around my feet. Gravel pinged against the undersides of my truck cab, and the landscape opened up around me, more grassland than trees. Flickers of orange light filled the sky, and the radio vomited a cacophony of human voices, all raging to be heard above the hiss of static and faint echoes of what sounded like gunfire.
On your left. Phyllis, watch out. Randy, we need help on the right side. My gun's jammed.
I swallowed and dodged potholes as sweat trickled down my scruffy face. Being in the oil field, nothing much scared me after working around some of these scum the companies recruited, but now my pulse thudded against the thin flesh of my temple. My heart rammed into each rib like it wanted out, and the air constricted in my lungs. Above me, the grim clouds reflected as seething red and orange flames. The gunshots became audible in spite of my rolled-up window, and I caught the rattle of the Kalashnikov rifle along with the deep boom of a real-life M2 machine gun. Take the next left and then proceed straight for 2 miles. Yanking hard on the steering wheel, I rounded the bend and my jaw dropped. The gravel stretched on a long back-and-forth swerving path that was about as straight as you could get for most rural southeastern Ohio backroads. On one side, tall wire mesh fencing lined the quiet ditches and grassy meadows, with a sign to my left, not 10 yards away, marked New Wilderness Wildlife Reserve. On the other side, a large open section of grassland stretched out into the distance, pockmarked by little tractor paths and clusters of short trees, a few ponds interspersed in between. I could see where in the daylight it would have been beautiful, full of multicolored wildflowers and flocks of butterflies, but it wasn't beautiful now. Fire chewed through the tall grass and slow-moving walls of hungry orange and red, sending sparks skyward and bathed the entire area in shifting shadows. Heavy gray clouds clouded the night sky, and I smelled burning rubber on the wind. Bright yellow muzzle flashes cut through the dark in the midst of the field, and a row of cabins burned on the other side of the plain, billowing black smoke rising like a pall of doom. Dug in across the field with their backs to the road, a thin line of people fought with desperate brutality. I saw Armalites and Kalashnikovs intermixed with bolt-action hunting rifles and shotguns, along with flaming bottles of gasoline and pipe bombs covered in taped-on nails. Explosions went off every few seconds, the improvised grenades tossed in waves, and one man shouldered what looked to be a rocket launcher made from a fire extinguisher, with fins welded onto it. The entire scene looked like the 4th of July on steroids, but the feral desperation of the fight told me that this was no rifle range. These people were fighting for their lives, and I felt like I had stumbled into something awful, a horrible nightmare that wasn't meant for the outside world to see. And then, as I gripped my steering wheel in dread, through the tall grass, they came, like lions throwing themselves at a herd of trapped gazelle. Hunched figures loped forward, their shadows otherworldly in the light of the flames. Long, slender, gray limbs ended in 3-fingered claws at each hand, the legs shoulder than the distended forearms so that they ran like gorillas, their muscled shoulders propelling them forward in frightening speed. They didn't have tails, their skin the texture of smooth birch bark, with twig-like extensions poking out from their warty elbows and spines, like prehistoric spikes on their backs. Each creature's head was long and narrow, like a crocodile's snout, but with a crown of more branch-like spikes around the skull and a fan, and no eyes that I could discern. This can't be real. In an instant, the screams came through the glass of my old truck cab, and cold, bone-chilling shrieks echoed across the wide fields. Not the pain to frightened squeal of an animal defending itself, but an ancient, hate-filled war cry that held no humanity in it whatsoever, repeated by dozens upon dozens of long-limbed, predatory fiends. The roar of a diesel cut through the night, and I barely reacted in time to avoid T-boning a massive green combine that burst through an open gate on the left side of the road, its front blades whirring. Someone had welded sharpened angle iron all around it, and gleaming chains had been bolted to the blades at the front, tipped with shiny bits of razor blades. Black exhaust gushed from its smokestack, and a young man with blonde hair piloted it from a cab enclosed by a rebar cage into the brushy field.
I'll clear the right side.
A man called through the radio sitting in my cup holder.
Jamie, you take the left. Let's go. Wrap 'em up, wrap 'em up.
Behind the combine came a big yellow backhoe, all covered in spikes and rebar, with long rubber hoses running from an oil drum, mounted on the back to a flaming nozzle affixed to its iron bucket.
Right behind you.
A girl's voice crackled amongst the chatter, and the two machines diverged to swing around on either end of the line of fighters, their tracks and tires churning up the muddy ground like mechanical dinosaurs. Even from my speeding truck, I heard the impact of the first creatures being mown down by the combine, its blades and chains ripping into flesh and bone with vicious fury. Opposite of it, the backhoe moved its craned arm like the neck of some giant monster and spewed bright yellow flames onto the onrushing horde of pale beings, lighting up the field for hundreds of yards around them. Dozens of mutants fell, either burned or diced to pieces, and the ground shook with the triumphant roar of the diesels. The sickly sweet stench of burned flesh filled the air. Machinery clanged and banged, and the guns roared with chemical delight. Pained screams from the bizarre creatures echoed, and above the gunfire, a cheer rang out from the line of people.
Bill, get out of there.
The girl called Jamie cried over the radio. In an instant, the triumphant moment turned to chaos, as a creature jumped almost 20 feet into the air and landed like a cat atop the combine. The iron spikes sank into its already bleeding feet and hands, but the monstrosity seemed too enraged to mind, and ripped into the rebar around the cab with abandon. Metal squealed, bent, and then sheared off as the glass of the cab had shattered. A man's screams briefly pierced the radio static, and the combine was overwhelmed, tipped onto its side by a wave of snapping monsters.
Fall back.
The old man's shout came through the radio even as I watched a figure that may have been him continue firing the M2 into the onrushing waves of creatures.
Fall back to the ridge.
Whoa! A white pickup truck lurched into the roadway, and I locked up my brakes to slide around it. A chestnut-haired girl around my age sat at the wheel, blood running down her forehead, with a black polo shirt on. In the bed stood an old man with glasses and gray hair, gripping the handles of a .50 caliber machine gun, its barrel cherry red with heat. Others streamed across the road in full retreat, all in black shirts with the New Wilderness logo on the front, and they all dragged wounded comrades away from the burning field. My truck ground to a stop on the side of a dirt embankment not 5 feet away, stalling from the sudden downgrade in RPMs. The people in the white truck blinked at me in shock, and I stared right back, both sides seeming confused as to why the other was there. "What are you doing?" The old man astride the .50 shouted and waved his arm at me, as if I were some airplane attempting to land in the wrong airport. "Get out of here, go." Jerked back into the present by his raspy command, I scrambled at the ignition, the stubborn motor choosing this moment to chug 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 instead of fire. Horrid reptilian chittering clicked nearby, and I whimpered like a trapped puppy, terror seething through my mind. Jamming the stick into reverse, I punched in my boot to the gas pedal. The transmission whined, my tires spun, and a sinking feeling ran through my guts. I was high-centered, my wheels caught on either side of the bank, the dirt lodged under my truck chassis holding me in place. It didn't matter if I had four-wheel drive or not if my wheels couldn't get purchase. I was stuck. Wham! My world lurched sideways like a massive fist had slammed into the cab of my beloved pickup. Gravity inverted, the seatbelt dug into my chest, and broken bits of glass sprayed across my field of vision. Everything seemed to move in slow motion, and I watched spare sockets, an old candy bar wrapper, and my handheld radio float through the air in front of my face. Reality snapped back like a gunshot as I crashed, and the mutilated Ford had rolled down into the ditch on the opposite side of the gravel road. I looked down at the cab ceiling, my arms hanging suspended from my shoulders, and registered a metallic taste in my mouth. Well, that's not good. Somewhere across the road came the dull thud of a heavy footstep, and I turned groggily to see what it was. The creature nut stood yards away, tall as a horse, and its crocodilian eyeless head swiveled from side to side, tasting the air. Red blood glistened on its dagger-like yellow teeth, bared in the firelight, and a long black serpentine tongue flicked in and out rhythmically. Something about its gray, sinewy form echoed into my head. It stirred a part of me that I hadn't known existed. I had been scared before as a little kid when my mom would get crazy because of her drug habit. But I had been scared in the streets when the older boys had tried to sell me to some homeless guy. And I had been scared the day one of the men on our rig down in New Mexico came to work with an axe and killed 4 people. But this was different. This was something else, something deeper. A primal, existential fear, one older than engines, skyscrapers, and radios. A fear born on instinct. The fear of prey when it sees its predator. Jerking its head around, the creature seemed to lock onto me, as if it could smell the terror seeping from my pores, and it opened its narrow jaws to reveal row after row of jagged, steak knife-sized teeth. It roared a colossal, prehistoric sound that made the skin of my arms crawl with dread. I gotta get out. I thrashed and clawed at my seatbelt buckle, my sweaty fingers slipping and sliding over the metal button. Both my lungs felt like they were too small to get enough air, and all the blood rushed to my head in a wave of panic. A shadow fell over me and I whipped my head around. Foul breath, reeking of the torn flesh of 100 bodies, blasted my face, with the open maw of the creature right outside my window. Thick gooey strands of saliva threw little rainbow refractions in the light, and the teeth that poked out from the mottled gray gums held bits of flesh and clothing stuck between them. A broken shoelace wound around one like a stuck noodle. I could see right down the dark cavern of its throat, and it almost resembled the inside of a rotted log, bumpy and grooved, with black flesh instead of rosy pink. I watched as the teeth headed right for my exposed face, before a flurry of gunshots rang out. Letting out a howl of pain and anger, the monster staggered back and dark black spots appeared on its bark-like hide. Smaller silhouettes dashed into the firelight, their guns spitting little streams of flame, while the heavy machine gun thundered on behind them. My mind still spun in horrified confusion, and I hung there motionless as the creature tumbled to the ground in a twitching heap. "Hurry up, grab him and let's go." One of the men in the road dumped several more rifle rounds into the head of the fallen beast, his comrades scuttling toward my truck. A muscular form crouched outside my window, and a man leaned in about my age, with close-cut black hair and a bloodied lip. "Hey, you still alive?" "So far." Blood surged in my skull, giving me a headache, and I shouted to be heard above the hammering of the big gun just outside. "My belt's stuck." A steel knife blade flashed in the dark, and I plummeted to the cab ceiling, barely managing to break my fall with both arms outstretched. Somebody grabbed me by the collar and dragged me out into the wet grass. "Get up, man, we can't stay here." I lunged to my feet and scurried with the rest of them for the white pickup truck, spent brass casings sliding under my boots like marbles. All around me, the creatures devoured anyone they caught up with, and it seems the guns never stopped firing. The night sky filled with smoke from the fires that raged across the open grass fields, and screams of torment from dying people rang in my ears. Diving over the side of the rusty truck bed, I huddled down behind the low wheel well, and the vehicle lurched away up the hill, plowing through a set of reinforced gates at the top. The instant that I saw the barbed wire top swing shut behind us, I sat up and the breath stuck in my chest. A crudely built log wall surrounded a cluster of single-story buildings with a large asphalt parking lot in the center. 4 towers stood at each corner of the fort, 2 looking like they had been used for ziplining at one time, and the other 2 likely built the same time as the wall, made from dented red shipping containers stood on end. From every direction, people carried green ammunition cans, dragged stretchers with wounded on them, a rush to man the ramparts of the wooden palisade, with all kinds of weapons in their arms. Many were young, likely no older than their early 20s at best, their faces sheet white with fear. "What is this place?" "Darren, grab some gloves and help Richard get this gun on that wall." Barking at the top of his gravelly smoker's voice, the old man waded through the sea of hot brass casings in the truck bed and leaned down to offer me a hand up. "On your feet, son, no time to waste." What's going?" "Phyllis, grab some ammo and top everybody off." Oblivious to my sputtered protests, the old man jumped down from the truck bed and continued pointing people to their stations. "David, get on the radio and tell the mortar crews to start laying hate. Sean, find this guy a gun and check on Carter's men. The dark-haired guy who had pulled me from my Ford jumped down from the truck and gestured for me to follow him. Come on, this way. Confused and terrified, I ran after him, dodging 5 girls in blood-stained clothes who ran to carry a wounded man back into a long rectangular building to our left, with a sign marked New Wilderness Visitor Center beside the doorway. We ducked through the door, then down a narrow hallway to the left, and the man named Sean pushed open a door to what looked like a storeroom. Green ammo cans were stacked to the ceiling with black plastic crates on the other side marked medical, and a mostly empty weapons rack bolted to the back wall. Various bits of vests, holsters, and tactical gear hung from hooks beside the ammunition, and a row of black gas masks dangled next to them. Did a doomsday bunker explode in here? You know how to shoot. He tossed a woodland camel pattern bandolier at me, the pouches already filled with gray steel magazines, and yanked one of the few remaining rifles from the weapons rack. Wide-eyed with shock, I blinked down at the web gear in my hands. Yeah, but what's going on? Sean pushed the gleaming black rifle into my arms and held my gaze with wild, bloodshot eyes. I ain't got time to explain, all right. If you want to live, follow me and do exactly as I say. Got it? Outside, the dull roar of something like a propane cannon split the air, and Sean grabbed a few more ammunition cans before he slipped past me out of the door. Come on, the mortars are up. We've got to reinforce the left flank or the freaks will be inside the wire. Put your stuff on, man, let's go. Running while pulling a pulley adjusted chest rig on proved to be nearly impossible, and so I slung the morass of Nylan over one shoulder, gripped my rifle as we sprinted through the courtyard. We passed 2 circular sandbag pits manned by a crew scrawny of teenagers who feverishly dropped homemade rockets into a couple of green painted steel pipes, dirt flying with every shot. Eerie roars echoed just on the other side of the wall, returned by the fighters atop the ramparts, pouring lead into the beast without pause, the crack of rifles blending into a never-ending wave. The stench of coppery blood and acrid gunpowder filled the air, along with pillars of black smoke from burning fuel bombs. Medics staggered around the yard, some of them girls who looked no older than 16, pressing white gauze to spurting wounds, and leaning over their wounded patients to shield them from dust kicked up by the mortars. It was absolute bedlam, and all I wanted to do was find something solid to crawl under. Carter. Sean charged up a set of steps and into a log pillbox built atop the leftmost corner of the wall. Ammo. Inside, a few older men with silver in their hair and beer guts beneath their weather-worn army fatigues snatched at the ammunition cans that Sean had offered, empty magazines covering the floor around them. Despite their bulky physiques, I got the impression from how they moved that these men had worn those uniforms before in a different time, when they had darker hair and slimmer waistlines. Looks like a VFW meeting on cocaine. One of the men, a thinner guy with a short gray ponytail and Viking-style beard, crouch-walked over to us. "Where's the 50?" he shouted, the incessant bam of guns enough to make my ears hurt. "Randy sent it to the front gate." Sean howled back and jerked his thumb at himself and I. "Where are your reinforcements?" The gray-haired man pointed to his right through the firing slit of the little fighting position. "Dawn's not far off. We just gotta hold him until then. Pick a spot and get to work." Sean scuttled to an open spot in the firing line, and I crawled up next to him, racking the charging handle of my rifle with clammy fingertips. I flicked the safety off and peered down the dimly lit iron sights into the darkness. Dear God. There had to be close to 200 of them, surging over the burning field past the fallen combine, and up the slope to the walls and fluid at deadly speed. Like ocean waves, they rolled forward, dozens upon dozens, a never-ending tide of long-limbed, reptile-faced monsters, with woody skin that seemed to eat bullets. Without fear, they threw themselves at the wall, oblivious to the danger, almost immune to the pain, driven by an insatiable urge to rip and tear. Their ancient battle roars enough to chill me to the bone. I blinked and caught sight of one as it crawled up the incline of its dead fellows, reptilian teeth bared, moving so fast that it was almost a blur. Placing the front sight post over its bark-like hide, I pressed the trigger over and over, the rifle bucking in my arms obediently. Gunfire from our position peppered the oncoming monster, and it fell with an agonized shriek less than 30 yards away, black blood oozing from dozens of wounds. In my hands, the smoking rifle yawned with an empty chamber, and I ducked down to reach for a fresh magazine. Just before I could reload, however, something in the distance caught my eye. Pinpricks of light flickered in the far tree line, yellow sporadic flashes that looked vaguely familiar. It occurred to me that the beasts outside weren't fleeing from the gunfire, even as we mowed them down, almost as if they had nowhere else to go but right through the hail of lead. By all accounts, they should have just turned tail and ran for the woods like any other animal. So why weren't they? Squinting hard, I focused on the lights, and something inside my brain had clicked. Muzzle flashes. They were concealed just inside the cover of the dark pines, as many as 60 more guns firing into the herd of crawling nightmares. But they weren't moving in to help clear the bees from the fort walls. Instead, they stayed where they were, turning any stray monsters that tried to escape away, and sent them lumbering toward our position. They're hurting them. They're hurting them right at us. The tree line. I slapped Sean's arm until he stopped firing and pointed to the distant gunfire. You see that? There are guys over there. Sean yanked a black handheld radio from his chest rig and clicked the talk button. Marksman, hit the trees, I repeat. Muzzle flashes in the tree line, hit 'em hard. I pressed the trigger several times in the general direction of the flashes, emptying mag after mag in an effort to keep both the monsters and the mysterious human instigators at bay. Others on the ramparts with scoped hunting rifles seemed to be having better luck, as cries of, "Got one! I hit him!" echoed from every position. One by one, the flashes started to fade out, either due to retreat or the marksmen finding their target. A soft warmth tickled my left cheek, and I turned to see the sky begin to lighten, the first long ray of sunshine slipping over the dark horizon. Dawn. Cheers went up from all down the line, and with the unknown attackers in the tree line suppressed, some of the monstrous creatures turned from the tide of lead to make for the forest. Their flight started to root as more of the creatures followed like a flock of birds, and soon the last of them disappeared into the trees on the far side of the scorched grassland. The gunfire started to slacken off, and I slumped down with my back to the wall beside Sean, the two of us grinning in relief. Not bad, newbie. He leaned his steaming rifle against the wall to cool and stuck out a hand. Sean Hammond. Ethan. I shook it, heart still racing, and I set my own rifle on the floor, waves of heat rising from its now purple barrel. Ethan Sanderson. He pulled out a small flask and unscrewed the cap to offer it to me. Well, Sanderson, cheers. You didn't die. I'm glad to know that's a celebratory accomplishment out here. With my limbs shaking from the adrenaline wearing off, I cast back my head to gulp down some of the burning amber whiskey. What were those things? Sean climbed to his feet and gave me a hand up. Birch crawlers. They usually don't cluster into super packs that big unless they're hunting or threatened. I figure we have Sheriff Warnow to thank for that. My eyes widened as I stared out into the gutted battlefield, trying to count the bodies and failing miserably. Warnow. Our Warnow. I don't get it, man. Why would the cops do something like this? That's exactly what I asked the sheriff. Sean's face hardened into a grim frown. Right before he tried to blow my brains out. They've been lying to us, all of us, for years. My blood ran cold at the way he said that, but I refused to lose my cool. So what do we do now? Picking up his rifle, Sean slung it over one shoulder and scratched at his stubble beard with a yawn. Well, I would say it's about breakfast time, wouldn't you? Might as well get comfortable, Sanderson. Looks like you're going to be here for a while since Wernow and his men are still out there. Too relieved to be alive and confused by the deluge of strange events that I had witnessed, I shuffled out of the pillbox and into the early morning breeze. Groans from wounded and dying fighters rose through the air. Many of the nurses weeping and wailing as more of the critically injured began to die from blood loss. Most of the gunfire ceased, only a few of the fighters still finishing off wounded birch crawlers with merciless hatred. In the creeping daylight, a carpet of dead monsters lay piled up against the palisade wall, some so high that I could have reached over and touched their still twitching claws. They had gotten close, too close, and I realized that my death had clambered within a few feet from me more than once this night. How these things even existed, I still didn't know. It made no sense to me, none of it. Hey, new guy. I looked down to see the chestnut-haired girl waving from beside a metal oil drum, a fire burning in the center of it. Soot and exhaustion lined her face, but it still bore a soft, friendly smile. You frozen up there? Over. It was over, at least for now, and that was all that mattered. I had survived my childhood. I survived the streets of Pittsburgh. If I could do that, I figured, then this strange park was no different. Just like before, I would take it one day at a time. I'd get some food, scrounge more ammo, and see if I could find some decent cell phone service. Maybe the girl by the fire would lend me her phone. It'd be a good excuse to get her number. You know, it's kind of pretty here in the daytime. Taking a deep breath of crisp morning air, I shouldered my rifle and made my way down the wooden rampart steps, the smell of wood smoke in my nose and the echoes of guns still ringing in my ears. There's nothing quite like the smell of fresh-baked bread coming out of the oven. What if I told you that you could get all of that deliciousness with none of the time and work involved? Well, you can from Wild Grain. Wild Grain is the first ever baked from frozen subscription box for sourdough breads, fresh pastas, and artisanal pastries. Wild Grain uses a slow fermentation process that's easier on your belly, lower in sugar, and rich in nutrients and antioxidants. Unlike typical supermarket bread, every item bakes in 25 minutes or less as well, which is very convenient. Wild Grain is offering delicious products such as an ancient grain sourdough loaf and fresh artisan fettuccine pasta. I received both of these items in my Wild Grain box and both were absolutely delicious. They tasted better than the regular stuff that I would buy at the store and much more fresh. My favorite had to be the ancient grain sourdough loaf. It was great for sandwiches or just good on its own with some butter and oil. And I felt good after eating it, not weighed down or too full. Plus, for every new member, Wild Grain donates 6 meals to the Greater Boston Food Bank, so you can eat good and do good all at the same time. All you have to do is sign up at wildgrain.com/creep. and choose which type of box you want to receive and how often. It's easy to reschedule, skip, or cancel. Plus, for a limited time, you can get $30 off the first box, plus free croissants in every box, when you go to wildgrain.com/creep to start your subscription. Yeah, you heard me, free croissants in every box, and $30 off your first one when you go to wildgrain.com/creep. That's wildgrain.com/creep, or you can use promo code CREEP at checkout. Crap. I wrenched the steering wheel over to the right, causing the tires to scream in protest. A deep horn blared loudly, almost rupturing my eardrums, and the interior was momentarily illuminated by harsh white headlights. For a split second, my light flashed in front of my eyes, and then I felt the bumpiness of the grassy edge of the road jostle me around. The 18-wheeler which had veered into my lane missed me by less than a foot, blasting by in a blur at what had been 70 miles an hour or more. After a split second of catching my breath, I jabbed the driver's window switch down and stuck my head out into the pouring rain. "Idiot!" I screamed at the retreating logging truck, though I knew the driver wouldn't be able to hear me. A moment later, an outraged woman's voice tumbled from the speakers of my rented Chrysler 300. "I beg your pardon." Regaining my senses and remembering that I had been in the middle of a phone call, I sat back down in my seat. "Not you, Aaron," I said apologetically. "If you didn't hear the commotion on my end of the line, I almost got splattered all over the front end of some moron's Peterbilt who wandered over to my side of the road." There was a moment of silence from the speakers, and then my agent let out a small snort. "Well, isn't that just grand? You gotta love idiots on the roads these days." It took a softer tone. "I'm glad you didn't get into an accident, Al. I don't feel like losing my best client and close friend in one go." I laughed. "Helps me relax to know that you care," I admitted then, after a moment getting the tension out of my muscles. I pulled the car back onto the road and continued on. It was the winter of 2022, and I was on my way to a book signing in Seattle from where I lived in Gold Beach, Oregon. I was a writer who had just broken the New York Times bestseller list with my debut novel, and as such, I was in the start of my book signing tour, which would take me around the country. Obviously, as many people would quickly realize who I am if I used my real name, I have changed it along with others. Aaron, my literary agent, had suggested that I fly to Seattle from the airport in North Bend. But I'm someone who's had a major anxiety over flying ever since the September 11th attack in 2001. So instead, knowing that I hadn't purchased a new car to replace my rather shabby and broken down one yet, she had arranged me a rental, and I had begun the almost 7.5-hour drive north. I wouldn't have had to deal with those dingbats if Interstate 5 hadn't jammed up with that accident, I muttered. "Well, you were the one who wanted to drive, Al." Aaron's chiding voice came through the speakers. "Do you have any idea where you are?" I glanced at the GPS map for what had to have been the 100th time. The screen almost seemed to glitch, jumping as the antenna on the top of my car attempted to communicate with an orbiting satellite above. Piece of crap. "No, this stupid navigation system is apparently on the fritz," I snorted. "So much for Enterprise being a good car rental company." I looked back just in time to see a sign with the gas symbol flash past. Thank God for small favors, I thought. "Hey, there's a gas station coming up soon. I'm a bit low anyway, so I'll stop there, get directions, and then I'll call you when I'm on my way, okay?" There was a sigh on the speakers. "Okay, just please try not to be too long. The publishing house won't like it if you show up to your very first book signing late tomorrow," she said. "I'll be as quick as I can," I said reassuringly, and then pressed the red disconnect button on the steering wheel, ending the call. I let out a sigh of relief. Aaron was my saving grace and had been the one to orchestrate my contract, including a very nice advance, but after a while, it became exhausting to deal with her. I stared out at the windshield at the 2-lane road in front of me, relishing in the silence, save for the rain pelting the car's windshield, the windshield wipers flicking it off, and the tires on the wet pavement. For a few more minutes, all I saw was nothing but endless trees pushing in close to the road, almost seeming as if they were jostling to see who drove up and down past them. Then, almost as if my thoughts had summoned it, I saw the bright lights appear ahead on the right like a lighthouse beacon. It was clearly one which had been here a very long time. The overall appearance gave the impression that it had been around since at least the 1950s, if not earlier. I grunted with surprise as I saw the light-up station logo swinging around in a lazy circle on its pole. the faded green outline of a brontosaurus and similarly weathered red letters spelling out Sinclair were ones I thought that I would never see in person, seeing as how the company had gone defunct back in March. Guess nobody told the owner of this one that. I pulled into the station, my tires driving over a small black wire which had caused a classic bell to ding loudly twice, somewhere out of sight. Pulling up next to the green pump, I shut the engine off and relaxed back into the comfortable leather, listening to the tick of the engine cooling down. As I closed my eyes, I could only hear the loud buzz of the fluorescent lights overhead, and the rain pelting the metal awning over the pumps. I opened my eyes as I heard the rain peter out, and I looked around, glancing at the analog clock on the dash illuminated by the overhead lights. 7:30 p.m. 10 minutes had passed. I sighed. "Come on, man," I muttered and then quickly tapped the horn. The blaring sound of it almost seemed to shatter the stillness like a baseball through a plate glass window. Still nobody. "Dang it," I whispered, and then I unbuckled my seatbelt and I pulled on the handle, using my foot to kick open the door. A bitingly cold wind smashed into my face as I stepped out onto the cracked concrete, causing me to flip up the collar of my coat in response. I glanced around, only hearing the sounds of the wind whipping through the trees, crickets chirping, and what had to be the hoots of an owl somewhere off in the forest beyond. The garage bays were open, and in the faded yellow light of what had to be an old incandescent bulb, I could see what looked like a 50s Cadillac and a 70s International Scout up on the lifts, but no mechanic in sight. And leaning back into the car, I leaned on the horn longer this time. Again, the sound reverberated off the trees and station. For some reason, I shivered at the noise. It almost feels sacrilegious to disturb the silence out here. I shook my head. Where the heck had that thought come from? I shook it away and waited another minute or so. There was still no sign of life. Maybe the station is actually closed. The thought was worrying. I hadn't seen another sign of civilization, aside from that idiot logging truck, in 2.5 hours. I didn't know how far it was until the next town or gas station, and as good as the Chrysler had been on gas, I didn't want to try driving further on only a quarter tank. I decided to find out for myself, slamming the driver's door closed with a loud thunk. Stepping around the front of the car, I walked across to the open bays, the sound of my footfalls echoing back at me. I glanced around, noticing the spilled oil on the ground, and the mismatched tools, bottles, and hoses heaved unceremoniously on the bench in the back. But still, I saw no one. Great, I thought, looking up to see the bright moon begin to appear from behind the clouds. I had begun to turn and stride towards what had to be an office or a convenience store when the figure burst out of the door, nearly causing me to jump out of my skin. Gah! I involuntarily let out, receiving a good-natured laugh in return. "Sorry, sir, I didn't mean to startle you, let alone make you wait so long." I caught my breath, and then let out a strained chuckle and looked up at the man. He appeared to be in his late 40s or early 50s, dressed in a green Sinclair jumpsuit adorned with the same green dinosaur in the front patch. The patch on the other side proclaimed the man's name to be Harold. The remaining hair on his head was slicked back, and he flashed me a smile with surprisingly bright white teeth. I held up my hand, giving it a little wobble, and gave a laugh of relief. "Don't worry about it, man. For a second I thought this place was permanently closed or something," I said, the steadiness returning to my voice. "No, sir, just the fact it's only little old me'd working the night shifts," he declared, jokingly wiping his brow. I snorted and smiled. The man clearly had a decent sense of humor. "I'm guessing you need gas?" he asked, changing the subject to business and gesturing to my car. I nodded, Yes, please, if you could fill her up with regular. He nodded and then began towards it as I jogged back around, opening the driver's door and pressing the button to pop the gas cap. Harold let out a low whistle as he pulled the pump from its cradle. Very nice car, sir, he exclaimed, looking it over. It looks expensive. I shrugged my shoulders. It is a nice car, a Chrysler 300S, but unfortunately it's not mine. He looked up at me and cocked an eyebrow as he slid the nozzle in and pulled on the handle. It's a rental, I added quickly, realizing it sounded like I had jacked it or something. He seemed to relax. Oh, yeah, that makes sense, he said jovially. It's nicer and newer than anything we normally see out here usually. I jerked my thumb at the open bays. I would say you have people with good taste around here, seeing as how that's a 55 Coupe de Ville back there, I said. He laughed, nodding approvingly. I see you know your cars, he said with an impressed tone, glancing at the readout on the pump. I do love them, I replied. He looked back up at me. So, are you some kind of auto collector, a race car driver then? He asked. I shook my head. No, afraid not. I'm a writer. He jerked his head up, his green eyes seeming to twinkle in the fluorescent lights. A writer? Well, blow me down. I never thought I would get a god-honest writer in my station, he exclaimed, smiling. I nodded, feeling a slight sense of uncomfortableness wash over me. I still hadn't gotten used to the reaction people had when they learned of my profession. He pressed forward. What kind of books do you write? He asked excitedly. I write in the horror genre, honestly, I admitted, causing him to smile wildly at the news. Hey, horror's my favorite style of books to read, he said. I love everything from the old classics to Stephen King. He looked at me quizzically. How many have you written so far? I held up a single finger. Just one published. I'm actually on the way to a publicity signing right now. He nodded approvingly, and then looked back at the pump before speaking again. So, have you ever seen anything truly scary? I raised an eyebrow at his question. That came completely out of left field. What do you mean by that? I asked in return. He still watched the pumps but replied. So many horror writers that I've heard talk about how they've had their own frightening experience, whether it's a plain old scare or even a supernatural experience. It's what helps them write truly horrifying tales. Now he looked back at me. His face held a smile which caused me to inwardly shudder a little bit. It almost seemed far too wide for a moment. Then blinking, I realized it was just a regular grin, if not just a bit of an odd one. The lights must have caused you to see things. He finished. So, I was just asking if you've ever had a scary experience which got you into writing horror. For a moment there was a silence between us as I pondered his question, only broken by an owl's screech somewhere in the gathering darkness. Then I shrugged. Honestly, I hate to disappoint you, but no, I admitted. He gave me a slightly surprised expression. Really? I nodded, deciding to be honest with him. Really? And to be completely truthful with you, Harold, as much as I love horror, both writing it and reading and watching it, I've stopped being scared of it a while ago. The surprised expression seemed to grow on his face. Really? He repeated and then looked down at the pump again. That's a shame, he said, his voice almost holding a trace of sadness in it. I nodded, having to agree with him. It is. I used to love getting scared by a good horror film or a book. But as I got older, it just seemed to, drift away. Now I just write what I know others are afraid of. Like I did with my first book here, but honestly, when I write, I don't feel that fear in me at all. I hated admitting it, even when I had given my first online interview with a magazine about my novel. I had lied about it, saying that my own work could scare the heck out of me. But in a way, it felt good to finally admit the truth to someone, even just a stranger that I would likely never see again. I looked up to find him giving me a rather intense and honestly extremely creepy stare. His green eyes almost seemed to glow in the lights and his smile had completely disappeared. I took a step back at the abrupt change in his demeanor, but just as quickly it too was wiped away, replaced by the smile that I had known since he appeared. "Well, I'm sure if you search hard enough, you'll find that feeling again," he said, his voice filled with what sounded like genuine empathy. I nodded, looking out at the woods. "I hope," I truthfully admitted, and then heard the sound of the pump finally clicking off. All done," Harold said happily, pulling the pump out of the car and replacing it back in its cradle. He looked at the readout. "That'll be 2317. I started slightly. Under $24 for 3/4 of a tank. I haven't heard of gas this cheap since I was at least a teenager, but at the same time, I wasn't going to look a gift horse in the mouth. I reached into my back pocket, pulling out my wallet and from it, my credit card. "Do you happen to accept credit?" I asked, half afraid that he would tell me he didn't. But he plucked the card happily out of my hand. "Of course we do, Mr. He looked down the name on my card. "Mr. Damascus. The credit card reader, however, is back inside the main building." He gestured back towards the door that he had exited from. "Would you mind if I took it back there and ran it?" I shook my head. "No, by all means, go right ahead," I said. And he turned away and strode back across towards the building. "I'll be right back out with your receipt, quicker than you can say. Bob's your uncle," he called. I let out another laugh at the phrase that I hadn't heard in years when I noticed something. I hadn't seen the man's back since he had appeared, and this was my first time. The back of his jumpsuit was the same stained green as the front, with a red oil rag peeking out of the back pocket. But my eyes were drawn to one thing. What looked like a large tear in it, just below the large logo patch adorning the back, almost as if he had been slashed. I could see an equally stained white shirt underneath it. Hey, I called out to him. He stopped and turned back to me, still smiling. "Yes?" he asked. I pointed to my own back. Your jumpsuit has a huge tear in the back of it. Just wanted to tell you in case you didn't know." For a moment, the same funny look came over his face, and then he waved his hand dismissively. "Oh, I know. I haven't had a chance to mend it yet," he said, and then holding up a finger pulled open the door, causing a bell hung from the inside handle to jing, and he stepped inside. I was left alone again with only the buzzing sound of the lights almost causing my ears to ring in the sudden silence. Not wanting to seem rude by waiting back in the car, I instead walked to the front and leaned against the hood, staring out into the night. My eyes absent-mindedly drifted off into the gloom as I waited for Harold to return. That's when my eyes finally glanced over at the large sign directly ahead of me. It was the one which advertised the price for gas by the gallon. And as I had pulled in from the other way, not to mention getting too caught up talking, I hadn't even looked at it. You could easily tell that it had fallen into a bit of disrepair, as the light inside, which allowed you to see the prices at night, flickered on and off, precariously, seeming as though it would burn out at any second. You could even hear it flickering loudly in the silence. That wasn't what drew my eye, though. No, what drew my eye was the prices displayed on the flickering sign. "There's absolutely no freaking way," I whispered to myself. I scanned down but kept looking at the top two figures. 88 cents a gallon for regular. I felt a small wave of confusion fall over me. No matter how out in the middle of nowhere the station was, there was no way that it would charge that little for gas. Not to mention, it showed prices for both unleaded and leaded gasoline, something that had been banned since at least the mid-90s. As my mind attempted to process this, something else fully sunk in. The entire forest around the station had fallen silent, and I'm not talking a normal silence either. The crickets, the owl, the rustling of what I thought were deer or elk in the trees had vanished. Even the wind had seemed to stop. It was an almost unearthly stillness, as if the entire forest were holding its breath. It was beyond unnerving and eerie, to say the least, and it caused a shiver to shoot up my spine. The only sound that I could hear was the almost maddeningly loud buzz of the overhead lights, which seemed to drone like that of a growling creature. I realized every muscle in my body had tensed up, though I couldn't understand why. Sure, the silence is eerie, but it's nothing to be afraid of, I thought. As much as I repeated that thought to myself, I couldn't help but feel increasingly on edge in the stillness. Okay, screw this, I said finally, the sound of even my own echoing voice sounding just off to me, pushing myself off my hood and beginning for the door that Harold had gone through. As I walked, I looked at the watch on my wrist, seeing another 15 minutes had passed since he had left. Where is he? Letting out a sigh, both of frustration and to try and relieve some of the odd sensation forming in my gut, I finally reached the door and reached out, gripping the handle. It felt almost shockingly cold in my hand, and I quickly twisted it, opening the door and causing the bell to jingle, sounding too loud in the quiet. I stepped inside and allowed it to swing shut behind me, the bell giving another jingle, this time muted, in the building's interior. I looked around. Aside from an old Coca-Cola machine in one corner of the room, there were no food or drinks in here. Instead, the 2 or 3 aisles taking up most of the space were filled with what looked like older-style cans of motor oil and other assorted automotive bits and bobs, all adorned with the dinosaur logo. I drew in a breath and then I coughed a little. It felt more than a little musty in here, as if it hadn't been aired out in a long time. Looking directly ahead, I saw the counter that Harold must usually be stationed at. An older-style cash register sat atop it, and behind it lay an open door marked Employees Only. Beyond was a long tiled hallway which stretched out for a while before disappearing around a corner. I stared at the cash register. I haven't seen one of these old jobs since I was a kid in the 90s. I thought a few nostalgic emotions breaking through my other emotions and tugging at my heartstrings, but it just as quickly shooed away by the uneasy feeling that was settling over me like a cloud of dust. This whole thing, this whole place just seemed wrong. I couldn't tell why, but it was making my arms and legs feel as though insects were inching along under my skin. After a moment's hesitation, I opened my mouth. Hey Harold, I called, my voice seeming muted just like the bell had. I waited. No answer. Hey Harold, are you back there? I called again. Still nothing. The feeling increasingly on edge as the fluorescent lights in here sounded like they were also buzzing too loud. I craned my neck to look down the corridor. Just barely at the corner, I saw the bright blue sign indicating a restroom. I made my decision, calling out again. Look, if you can hear me, Harold, I'm coming over to the counter to use the restroom, okay? I can't hold it until I get to the next town. That was a lie. I hadn't eaten or drank anything in the last 2 hours to make me have to go. But just in case he came around the corner, I didn't want to get into trouble, as odd as I felt. I still didn't want to piss the man off. Taking a deep breath, I hopped the counter and stepped into the corridor. Unlike the main room, this was lit by 3 or 4 incandescent light bulbs dangling down from the ceiling. It gave the hall a slightly dimmer look than behind me, and I hesitated for a moment before starting down it, taking care not to have my footsteps echo too much. The hall seemed to go on forever, but eventually I reached the corner. Wanting to keep up appearances, I turned the knob for the bathroom and opened it. After looking in for a split second, I shut it quickly, suppressing a cough and a gag. It had looked disgusting, as though it hadn't been cleaned in years, if not decades. Turning back, I noticed a brighter light down at the end of the next stretch of hallway. I debated for a moment and then I began down it. All I wanted was to be out of here. I passed another open door, glancing through it. I saw the 2 garage bays and the view outside. The blast of cold, fresh air relieved me somewhat, and I continued on. As I reached the doorway, I looked around, seeing that it was an office. 2 desks stood inside, each with nameplates on the edge of them. I spied Harold's name on the far one. I also saw my credit card sitting in the middle of the table. The bright blue stood out amongst the dark wood and the white papers. Letting out a relieved sigh, I crossed to it quickly and picked it up. I decided that I would leave a 20 and 10 in cash on the desk instead and just get the heck out of here. I didn't know where the man had gone to, and every fiber of my being was telling me to leave. As I reached for my wallet, my eyes caught a plaque on the wall behind the desk, the faux gold glinting in the low light. I stared at it. The photograph was clearly Harold's, looking almost the same as I had seen him, just a lot cleaner. Below that was a declaration etched into the fake gold. Employee of the month, Harold Janikowski. I couldn't help but smile a little at how hard he must have worked for it. Less than a second later, though, the smile dropped from my face as I read the inscription underneath it. August 1976. I shook my head, hoping that I was just seeing things in the low light, hoping that it would change to 2006 or heck, even 1996. But no, it remained the same. What the? I breathed out, feeling another shiver go down my spine. There was absolutely no way that, if he looked to be in his 40s or 50s in the mid-70s, that he would still look the same 46 years later. He would at least be in his 80s or 90s now, and would very much not still be working here. What is going on? I whispered again, feeling like tendrils of dread were reaching out of the gloom and jamming themselves in me. I turned to book it out of the room and out of the station entirely. But I froze as I saw Harold. He sat in an old-style black swivel chair, his back to me in the next room. I couldn't tell what the room was, as it was lit only by a single, very dim bulb directly over him. But the room was giving me off truly creepy vibes. For the first time in years, I felt the first inklings of fear. Before I had a chance to move or say anything, he spoke. "Well, Mr. Damascus," he said, his voice almost inflectionless. I began to speak. "Look, I'm sorry that I barged back in here, it's just..." I was cut off as he continued. "Well, Mr. Damascus, how do you feel?" My shoulders slumped as I felt a wave of confusion envelop me. "Excuse me?" I managed out. "How do you feel?" He repeated and then continued, his voice finally seeming to gain some cadence to it. "Do you feel afraid? Do you feel fear?" He let out a low chuckle, one that almost seemed different from the happy one that I had heard outside. I didn't know how to respond. Finally, he spoke again. "It's okay, you don't have to tell me. I know, I can feel it." He let out another chuckle, and I felt multiple shivers shoot up my spine. "And frankly, Mr. Damascus, I'm happy about that," he said, standing up but still keeping his back to me. "Because you all taste so much better when you're afraid." This time, I did manage to say something. "The heck?" It wasn't the most eloquent response, but apparently Harold had found it funny, as he let out another low, creepy chuckle. He finally turned towards me and I jumped backwards, slamming into his desk and causing his nameplate to fall to the ground. The man still smiled at me, his smile now holding a very definitive wideness to it, holding an almost pants-wetting wickedness in it. But he didn't seem alive. His previously sparkling green eyes now seemed glassy and unseeing. To put it bluntly, he almost more resembled a ventriloquist dummy, a puppet than anything. He almost seemed to lean towards me, and finally he spoke. "I'll make it sporting, though. You have 20 seconds to run," he said. Swallowing hard, I looked around and saw a tire iron on his desk. I snatched it up, ready to club the man over the head if he made a move towards me. That's when he simply dropped forward onto his face. he fell halfway forward into the room and didn't move. I looked down at him and gasped as I realized what I was seeing. The man looked like nothing more than a deflated beach ball, as though all the organs and blood in him had been sucked out. I saw the tear in the back of his jumpsuit again, this time much more pronounced. Behind it, his dirty white shirt had been torn as well, and it revealed a hole in his actual back. I could see the white of his spine clearly visible in the yellow light. As I stared down at him, I heard a voice. This one, though, was not Harold's. It seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once, much lower than I had ever heard a human voice speak, and it alone almost made me piss myself, because it held a truly evil, sadistic tone to it. 20, 19, 18, 17. I looked up and into the darkened room Harold had fallen out of, and finally, for the first time in years, I screamed. Hovering just in the darkness beyond the edge of the dim light's gaze were two enormous, glowing green eyes. They were larger than a human's eyes ever could be, and in a very inhuman shape, looking like crescent moons. They held the most evil, sadistic glee that I had ever seen in my life. At my scream, the voice stopped counting down and it laughed. A great booming laugh that sounded like nails on a chalkboard. And then it began counting down again, the malicious excitement in it audible. 16, 15, 14. I didn't wait any longer. I didn't want to see what those eyes belonged to. I turned and sprinted out of the office, running down the corridor, my footfalls and panicked breathing echoing back to me like a gunshot. The corridor seemed to go on forever, and I couldn't understand why it was taking so long to reach the corner. Finally, though, I reached it, and froze. I was back at the entrance to the office. What the? Behind me, I heard the voice reach 10, and I began sprinting again down the hallway. It seemed to take even longer to reach the corner, and this time, I reached out to grab the corner edge, only to grab the wooded edge of the office door. My eyes widened, and I felt tears begin to fall from my eyes as I ran again. The voice continued as I dashed down the ever-increasing corridor. 7, 6, 5. I let out a strangled sob as I grabbed for the tiled corner, pushing off the edge of the corridor to snatch at it. Instead, I smashed into the wall next to the office door. I fell in a heap, trying to force myself up when I heard it finished. 3, 2, 1. Ready or not, Mr. Damascus. Here I come. As it finished uttering the last word, the voice dropped even lower, as if I were hearing the voice of the devil himself speak to me. I realized if I looked behind me now that I would see it. Standing in the middle of the office over its human puppet, I refused to look back. I knew that it wanted me to. Tears flowed freely down my cheeks, mixing with the blood from my head where I had slammed into the wall. Every horror movie death in movies and books flashed through my mind, and I knew all of them weren't even remotely as horrible as what that thing had planned for me. That's when a thought, just a tiny glimmer of hope, flashed through my mind. Something that I had seen as I had walked down the hall to the office. I felt adrenaline coursing through me. I might die trying to do this, but I have to try, I thought. I heard the floor behind me rattle and I felt hot, stinking breath fall across the back of my neck. For a microsecond, I felt paralyzed with fear, and then I let out a strangled cry exploding into motion. I heard a bellow of frustration behind me, followed by a laugh. It knew once I had reached the end of the corridor, it would use whatever power it had to bring me right back next to it. It had power over this corridor, but it doesn't realize that it left a weak spot open. The thought still echoing in my mind, I ran, unable to keep myself from screaming this time as I dashed down the corridor. It seemed even longer than before, but as I reached the halfway point, I saw what I had been hoping to spy. The door into the garage stood open, almost hidden out of sight beyond a shelf of oil. I let out another cry, this one of determination. Behind me, I heard the creature stop laughing. Now it let out a bellowing cry of rage, realizing what I intended to do. I felt it begin to thunder up the corridor after me to snatch me up, the feeling of something sharp sliced across my back. And then I was leaping for the doorway and through it. I landed in a puddle of still, sticky oil underneath the Cadillac. What I saw now was rusting away with decades of disrepair. Not wasting a second, I jumped to my feet and ran for the open bay doors. Behind me, I heard a louder bellow, but I didn't look back. I burst out from inside the doors into the night, now laden with the sounds of the forest again. I dashed for my car, almost flying over the hood, and ripped open the driver's door. Crashing into the seat, I stabbed at the start button, for a moment terrified that, like the typical horror cliche, it wouldn't start. But to my surprising gratitude, it did, the roar of the V6 thundering out. As I grabbed the knob to jam into drive, I risked one glance up, and I couldn't help but scream out again. The entire gas station had gone dark. The inside, the overhead lights, everything. I could see the outline of the building, but that was it. And the eyes glowed at me from inside the bays with absolute rage and hatred. Still screaming and staring at them, I slammed my foot down onto the accelerator. The tires screamed and the car shot forward like a rocket, tearing out from under the awning and out onto the road. I refused to look in the rearview mirror. I knew that I would see those eyes one final time in them, and I didn't want to. I just kept my eyes on the road in front of me, as far as my headlights reached, my knuckles white as I gripped the wheel and roared away from that place behind me. I just about never let up my foot from that gas pedal, taking the corners far too fast. Not until the warm lights of the next town finally came into view, one that I can't recall the name of. I felt myself beginning to cry, this time tears of happiness and relief. I drove straight through to the police station. I knew that I could never tell them what had actually happened to me. They would think that I was utterly insane or on something. But I could tell them that I had been attacked by a crazed lunatic at an old gas station, and that's exactly what I did. I burst in, begging to speak to someone. The officers at the desk calmed me down and took my statement, taking it all very seriously when I showed them my back, which, as it turned out, had 3 deep slashes in it. But when I told them where it happened, confused looks came over both their faces. As a paramedic rushed in from outside to check my wounds, one of the officers walked into the back, returning with the sergeant on duty, an older gentleman in his 60s. "Please tell me again what happened to you," he had asked gently. I did, and when I finished, he shook his head. "Son, it couldn't have possibly have happened at the Sinclair station 10 or 12 miles back," he said softly. I stammered. "Why not?" I demanded, struggling for my words. "Because," he began, "it closed in 1979 after a huge fire had gutted it, killing everybody inside. It's been almost a half a year since that incident now. I never made my book signing, which earned me a furious phone call from Erin. Her fury disappeared when she heard that I had been attacked. I told her that it had been from someone that I had pulled over attempting to help on the side of the road. I didn't want to repeat the same conversation that I had had with the police. They said they would try and find whoever had attacked me, but I know they never will. Not after they showed me a newspaper article, yellowed with age, showing the burned-out hulk of the gas station that I had been to, along with a very familiar photograph of a smiling man next to it. I still am a horror writer. The horror that I saw that night didn't stop me from writing. My second novel is due out this year, but now whenever I sit down on my computer and begin to write a truly scary scene, I feel the chills of fear for my own creation jolt up my spine, because I know true horrors lie in this world, and I hope I never come across them again. I'm posting this here not only to tell the truth finally about what I experienced, but also as a warning to anyone who will listen. If you're ever in the Pacific Northwest on a lonely 2-lane road in the middle of nowhere, and you happen to come across an old-looking gas station lit up with a green Brontosaurus logo spinning in the night, just keep your foot hard down and keep going, because you may not be as lucky as I was. Who wants better sex? And who wants to start having better sex immediately? Adam and Eve is offering 50% off just about any item, plus free shipping, which includes rush processing. And more than that, Adam and Eve want to make your life easy. They offer discreet shipping, as your privacy is their #1 concern. Whether you're trying to spice it up in the bedroom with your partner, or make some time just to relax by yourself, Adam and Eve is your go-to. Just go to adamandeve.com and select any one item, and make sure to enter offer code Mr. Creeps at checkout. This is an exclusive offer specific to this podcast, so be sure to use the code Mr. Creeps to get your 50% discount off any item, plus 100% free shipping, and get it fast with rush processing. Again, that's code Mr. Creeps at checkout. Here at Redburn Village, we work hard to ensure all residents enjoy their retirement in a relaxed, peaceful environment. Our assisted living facilities enable you to enjoy maximum independence, but with a safety net of highly skilled nurses available 24 hours a day, offering you and your loved ones complete peace of mind. It's a glorious place to wake up each morning, cozy, friendly, warm. So why not come see what we have to offer? At Redburn, you won't just live, you'll live to the fullest. The one-eyed cat skulked around my new garden, no doubt gearing up to fertilize the rose bushes. Or so it seemed. In retrospect, I may have rushed to judgment. But to be fair, the big move had me all stressed out, and cleaning up some strays water crap every morning wasn't quite how I had pictured my retirement. By my feet, there were 2 cardboard boxes. I grabbed a fuzzy slipper from the closest one and shouted, "Go on, get out of here." The slipper flew in a smooth arc but missed by a solid 3 meters. My wife Mary would have hit the roof if she had caught me using animals for target practice, even ugly ones. The little vagrant glanced at the slipper, yawned, and then strode along the side of the house and disappeared. "A flea bag," I grumbled. "Honestly, Dad," Angela said, as she carried another box out of the van, "we've been here for 5 minutes and you're already all worked up. Remember what the doctors told you?" Yeah, nice and easy. But you've got to show these vermin who's boss, otherwise they'll walk all over you." Angela's nose wrinkled. She had a medium build, short auburn hair, and, like her dear mother, a soft spot for animals, especially useless ones. That's probably why she had fallen for Patrick, who I had clocked for an oxygen thief ever since he asked for help changing a tire on a Ford Escort. We took a moment to survey the peaceful street. The Redburn Village consisted of a huge Georgian mansion, surrounded by a semicircle of identical red brick houses. "I still don't get why you insisted on being so far out the way," Angela said. I had rented a place at the outermost point, a real sore spot for my daughter. She wanted me in the main facility so the staff could spoon-feed me mushy carrots and wipe my butt twice a day, but I quickly poured cold water on that idea. "Will you quit worrying? Didn't you see the brochure? If I so much as stub my toe, they'll airdrop in a troop of nurses." After a patented Donnelly eye roll, Angela carried a footstool off into the house. Sometimes I couldn't help but see the funny side of our predicament. It still feels like only yesterday she needed me to shine a flashlight in her closet to chase away the monsters. In the front lounge, she said, "I just don't want you to feel like you had to come here. You could always live with me and the kids." Like me, Angela acted a tad hard-headed at times. "Sweetie, this was my idea, remember? This place will do grand. Actually, retirement homes sickened me. They're the last stop before checkout, everybody knows that. But Angela had 2 moody teenagers and an overactive 9-year-old to raise. By herself. Already that house was a circus, and I refused to be a burden. After dropping off those first boxes, I went outside to fetch more, only to discover a gray-haired man with narrow cheeks trimming the hedges along the edge of my garden. Behind him stood a gangly orderly, cursed by the worst case of neck acne you had ever seen. "What do you think you're doing?" I shouted, rushing over to snatch his shears away. Stringy drool leaked from the corner of the man's mouth as he mimed clipping the air several times. "Well?" I asked impatiently. "I'm Noel. I'm the gardener here." His voice sounded slow and sluggish, drunk almost. "Well, Noel, I don't need any landscaping done. I'll take care of that myself, thank you very much." I offered him the shears, which he accepted after a few seconds. Neck acne looked like he wanted to punch me, a feeling that was very much reciprocated. My daughter wandered out of the house and joined us at the edge of the garden, and then Noel said, "I'm Noel. I'm the gardener here." Again. Slightly confused, I cleared my throat. I'm Thomas, and this is my daughter Angela." "Pleased to meet you," she said, offering him her hand, and then, when he didn't respond, she reeled it away and quickly cleared her throat. So Noel, how do you like it here at Redburn?" The muscles in his mouth spasmed involuntarily as his blue eyes glazed over. "The assisted living facilities enable us to enjoy independence, with a safety net of highly trained nurses available 24 hours a day. The staff ensure even the smallest details receive their full attention, offering me and my loved ones complete peace of mind. It's a glorious place to wake up each morning. Cozy, friendly, warm." "Okay," I replied after a short pause. "Here, we don't just live. We don't. Noah's eyelids fluttered as if he had gotten laid out by a straight right cross. He looked from Angela to me and then back and forth. I don't want this anymore," he gasped, his whole body trembling. Neck acne quickly clamped a firm hand around Noel's shoulder, leaning in close. "Let's go, Mr. McCann. The Ivy on the west side of the main building's gone crap again." "Ivy?" "That's right. You're Noel, the gardener here, remember?" Yes, I'm Noel. I'm the gardener here." His voice sounded brisk and relaxed once again. We watched the 2 men totter off along the curved road, the orderly's hand flat against Noel's back, and then I turned to Angela and said, "What's his problem?" "Honestly, Dad, don't be so insensitive. The poor guy's obviously got something wrong with his head." Her tone reminded me of the one my wife took anytime I pointed out how ugly kids had gotten these days. "Looks like he's not the only one," I said, gesturing broadly over the street, at a dozen other residents dragging themselves up and down the path on metal walkers, past others who stood on their front walkways like mannequins. Angela grabbed a hefty box from the back of the van. "Oh, what is this even?" "Your mother's antique cutlery. Give it here." It switched from her hands to mine. At 68 years of age, I was no spring chicken. But 4 decades of work in construction had left me reasonably well-muscled. "What's it made of? Gold?" "Silver, actually." Rummaging through a smaller, more manageable box, she said, "Do you really need all this crap? What are you planning to do with it?" "That's not crap. That's my backup torch and a Decker power drill. Do you know how much that beauty cost?" "I know what it is. I'm asking what you need it for." "We'll say there's a power outage and I have to put up a poster board." Angela threw up her hands. "Get the staff to help. The doctor specifically told you." Don't get me started with that quack. See, that's the problem with your generation. You listen to all these fancy buzzwords and think you've got a million imaginary diseases. Honestly, Dad, sometimes it's like you're obliged to have an opinion on everything under the sun. And with that, she stormed off into the house. The two of us decorated each room with quaint, sentimental objects that reminded me of Mary. At one point, Angela happened to cross a picture of me and her mother on our wedding day and went all quiet, her bottom lip quivering. Paternal instinct told me that she needed a hug. I threw my arms around her, kissed the top of her head, and then gently cradled her like a baby. No matter how old kids get, they never stop needing their dad. Mary often joked about our daughter being my Achilles heel, about how she had a direct line through my stubborn nature. You've got a prickly outer shell, Thomas Donnelly, but that's all just a front, she would say with a cheeky grin. Secretly, you're a big teddy bear. We stood there in silence, my arms wrapped around Angela, until at long last she said, I miss her so much. I know, sweetheart, I know. Before we had finished unpacking, another member of the Redburn staff knocked on the front door. Unlike the previous fella, who had a skinny neck ravaged by acne, this one had no neck at all. He looked like a potato with a face carved into the front. Past him above the rooftops, the sun had almost set. Had the whole day already blitzed past. When I pulled open the door, the potato-faced man said, Excuse me, but Miss Flanagan has requested your daughter stop by the main office to discuss emergency contact information. The frequent pauses he took to draw breath made his speech pattern weirdly stilted. But there's still so much to do, Angela protested. I'll go, I said. I'll handle the rest. After unloading those final boxes, I sized up every room, and then like an expert surgeon, laid out an assortment of tools all real men should have. Screwdrivers, tape measures, hammers. The idea of lounging about all day made my stomach churn. That's why I had protested when Mary initially suggested that we retire. Of course, once she got the diagnosis, I started hating myself for not listening. My work sabbatical was meant to be temporary, but after the funeral, the boss called me into his office and said, Wouldn't it be nice if you had more time to yourself, Tom? A younger me would have raised a fit at some guy pushing him out the door like that, but after losing Mary, it hardly seemed worth the fight. I became numb to the world, stuck in, run out of the clock, made with nothing to do besides home DIY, and there'd be no shortage of that now since I had taken up residence in an absolute bomb site of shoddy workmanship. The glass door opening to the rear garden jammed at the midpoint. Half the cabinet hinges were losing their baby's teeth, and the floorboards squealed louder than my grandson anytime you told him that he couldn't play his Nintendo. But first, that front lounge demanded a shelf on the sidewall, a place to display Mary's favorite necklace, along with some select photographs. After mounting the mini shrine, I gently ran my fingers across a shot of her taken down by the beach. What do you think, sweetheart? I said. Would you still love me now that I'm a useless old fogey? Her picture didn't answer. It never answered. From the corner of my eye, I spotted a strip of wallpaper peeling away from the skirting board, directly beneath the window. Grunting heavily, I got down onto my knees for a closer inspection, my spine feeling like it had gotten hammered by a hot iron. Alongside my head, that scraggly feline from earlier jumped up onto the outside ledge. Half of the cat's left ear was missing, and judging by the missing clumps of fur, it had gotten into a brawl with an electric razor. You could barely tell that it was a tabby. Go on, get. While I furiously rapped the glass, the cat lifted a hind leg and casually licked its own crotch. Murmuring my disdain, I rolled up my sleeves and peeled away the wallpaper, only to discover the beginnings of deep marks etched into the wall, some so deep that my thumb fit right inside them. I let out a low whistle. To me, it looked like somebody had gone back and forth with an axe and then done a third-rate job at papering over the damage. No two ways about it. The entire lounge needed to be replastered. As I mused over the best-sized trowel for the job, practically giddy with excitement, the doorbell rang. A nurse with long dark hair stood on the front porch. Mr. Connolly, I presume. Call me Thomas. Pleasure to meet you, Thomas. I'm Prisha, one of these staff nurses here. I've come to give you a checkup. Checkups, otherwise known as the perfect opportunity for smart Alex to point out the things you already knew didn't work right. Still, always better to get things over and done with. Fine. In the lounge, she fitted a tube around my arm and inflated the cup before listening to my heartbeat through a stethoscope. Already bored of the dreary silence, I asked, "Well, how long have you worked here?" "I just started 2 days ago," she answered. Her attention focused on my wrist as she tracked the pulse. "You're in pretty good shape, Thomas. You'll have to tell me your secret." "Oh, you know the usual. Drink plenty of water, get as much fresh air as you can. And I was a builder for 40 years. And that'll keep you fit all right." She grabbed a notebook from her pack and flicked through my case notes. "Now, what's this about a metal plate?" I drummed my forehead. "A work mishap, not my fault. Some idiot who had no business being on the construction site. He got the sack and I got a plate on my skull." "Oh, sounds nasty." She handed over a clear plastic tray with a little compartment on it for the red and yellow pills. "Okay, so we're going to keep you on a basic course of meds. Nothing serious, just some essential vitamins. But generally, you're in tip-top shape. I wish the rest of our residents were as healthy as you." "Reckon you could put that in a letter and post it to my daughter." She smirked. With that, the nurse gathered up her things and said her goodbyes and then left. In the kitchen, I heated a tuna casserole and ate it standing next to the counter. The cat followed me around the back of the house, watching my plate fixedly from the window beyond the sink, its single eye glowing against the dusk. "I suppose you're looking to get fed, huh?" I said. The cat licked the roof of its mouth as though agreeing with the statement. "Well, forget it." A spontaneous staring contest broke out. "I will blast you with the hose." My agitation gradually boiled over into anger as the four-legged menace refused to budge. "That's it, don't say I didn't warn you." A framed photo of Mary stood on top of the microwave, a sentinel on guard duty. Her picture almost seemed to frown at me. "Oh, come on, I wasn't serious." Throughout the years that we had spent together, my wife almost drove me to the loony bin by constantly bringing home injured critters. Back then, it nearly drove me up the wall, but now, I'd give anything, literally anything, to have her barge through the door carrying a baby bird with a busted wing, just one last time. "All right," I muttered to her picture. I scrapped leftovers onto a plate and set them on the outside step. The sentient ball of fuzz wasted no time getting stuck right in. Narrowing my eyes, I said, "This is a one-time deal. Don't get any funny ideas." After washing up, I wasn't yet ready for bed and honestly felt rather lonely sitting there, mindlessly flicking through photo albums. When you lose your soulmate, they leave behind this unpluggable gap, one no amount of petroleum-based putty could ever fill. Although Mary never strayed too far from my thoughts, a late-night stroll would at least help clear my mind. Outside, warm light spilled from the lampposts, contrasted by the darkness of the road. A high iron fence surrounded the entire estate, the only way in or out through an automatic gate, because the last thing that people my age want is break-ins or drug addicts lounging around. A curved pavement carried me past handsome homes. Each time the wind gusted, leaves scattered across gardens and back doors banged lightly. Another sure sign these people didn't understand the meaning of home repairs. The main building dozed, despite it not being all that late. Most likely the feebler residents had already turned in for the night. I continued along that asphalt road until up ahead, a distorted shape blitzed across my path, quickly disappearing between two houses. It only stayed visible for a fraction of a second. Probably my imagination. At my age, my eyes play tricks. Further along, I got a glimpse of a silhouette peeking over a slanted roof. A sudden gust of wind made me squint, and by the time my eyes adjusted, the thing had vanished. The dang optician had warned me about not wearing my reading glasses more often. Just then, something swooped above my head, momentarily blotting out stars. A moment later, there was this brief, far-off growl, an odd mixture of a lion's roar and a jackal's bark. I couldn't dismiss that as blurred vision. My creaky knees rattled as I broke into a spontaneous jog, eager to get home. The growl, if you could even call it a growl, came again, closer this time. I pinched my keys between my first and second fingers and I held up a closed fist. Thoughts of Mary got swallowed by fear. Mindful of the cramping muscles in my legs, I bolted from one circle of light to the next until, midway between 2 points, my left foot clonked against a solid object and it sent me tumbling forward. On instinct, my hands shot out. In your late 60s, a fall like that usually meant a one-way ticket to the ER, but Lady Luck had smiled down on me that night. My palms burned from where they had scraped against the asphalt, but I had survived. In a heartbeat, I scrambled back to my feet and spun toward whatever had tripped me, and as I did, my stomach clenched, because now I could see what it was. A pale figure flat on their back, completely motionless. A nasty jolt of terror stabbed me as I leaned close to the body and realized I would actually recognize the person lying there. It was Noel. His face looked pure white. The thin lips had gone bluish at the corners, and the entire right half of his neck almost appeared black from an ugly purple bruise. After failing to locate a pulse, I rushed home and called the Redbird reception, and then watched through the lounge window as 2 orderlies loaded Noel onto a stretcher and wheeled it away. My hands refused to stop shaking. What sort of asylum had I checked into? A few minutes later, Potato Face stopped by, spouting off some stuff about Noel's heart giving out. "What about the bruise?" I demanded, shocked that he actually expected me to believe everything was hunky-dory. "There was no bruise." "No bruise?" The poor guy had one the size of my fist. "Mr. Donnelly, you're mistaken. It's late and you're tired." The two of us argued back and forth, me growing steadily more agitated, him sticking with his BS story until finally he signed off with, "Miss Flanagan will explain everything tomorrow night at the weekly meeting." Okay, fantastic, explain away. Whatever she said made no difference to me because I didn't plan to stick around. Before, I had dismissed the lounge marks as the result of hiring a cheap laborer. But after hearing that growl and stumbling over Noel's body, suddenly they seemed more sinister. All night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling. I couldn't have slept a wink even with Mary beside me. First thing in the morning, I called Angela. "Dad, what's going on?" There was no need to worry about her plunging into the grisly details. "Oh, everything's grand. I've just been thinking. This whole move might not be such a great idea." "Why, what happened?" "Nothing, it's just I've had some time to think and you're right. Living with you might be the best option for everyone. Redburn's not really a great fit." Immediately, her voice lost any sense of empathy, of warmth. "But Dad, the staff there work hard to ensure all residents enjoy their retirement in a relaxed, peaceful environment. Their assisted living facilities mean you'll enjoy maximum independence, but with a safety net of highly trained nurses, available 24 hours a day." She rattled off the spiel like a recording machine. "Angela, why the heck are you talking like that? They'll ensure even the smallest details receive their full attention, offering you and your loved ones complete peace of mind. It's a glorious place to wake up each morning. Cozy, friendly, warm. At Redburn, you won't just live. You'll live to the fullest." She took a deep, shuddering breath. "Yeah, I completely agree. You should stay put." Before I could get another word in, she signed off with, "Hey, glad you're enjoying yourself. Gotta go. Love you." As I slumped back into an armchair, completely dumbfounded, The cat jumped up onto the window ledge and licked its front paw pad. Things were getting seriously weird. So, on my first night in Redburn Village, I had been stalked by a strange, shadowy figure, discovered my neighbors act all like absent-minded like a pack of zombies, and stumbled across the corpse of a fellow resident. For my own safety, I needed to get out, fast. Angela still had the moving van, but speaking with her over the phone, you would have thought they hired her to run their summer marketing campaign. Again and again, she regurgitated the brochure's spiel about highly skilled nurses and complete peace of mind. While their meltdown could wait, I planned to catch a bus into Dublin, book myself an overnight stay at one of these cities' many overpriced hotels, and send for my wife's things later. I loaded some spare clothes and an emergency toolkit into a suitcase and rolled it over to the front gate, where a bulky orderly came out of the hut and said, "Where do you think you're going?" "None of your business. Open the gate." "Well, seeing you're a resident here, I would say it is my business." Already seeing red, I clenched my jaw. "I'm gonna count backwards from 5. If that gate's not open by the time I reach 1, we're gonna have a serious problem." Get out of here. I don't want to see you here again, got it?" His giant arms folded across a burly chest. Although still fairly hefty from all those decades in construction, my fighting days were long done. I would have loved to wipe the smug grin off that guy's face, but just marching across the village really got me feeling the age in my joints. The guard would have had me seeing stars in no time. "What's the big deal?" I asked, now furious. "Residents aren't allowed to leave without permission." "Whose permission?" "Miss Flanagan's." "Ah, Miss Flanagan, the Redburn head honcho. Well, then get on your walkie-talkie and tell her to get out here, chop chop." He smirked, refusing to say another word or budge a single inch, even as we squared off with one another. A showdown. I stormed into the main facility where thick black grime engulfed the point where 2 walls met the ceiling. How could they have let such a nice building fall into such poor condition? A short-haired receptionist behind the counter told me the same thing as the guard. Residents can't leave without permission. "Well, then go fetch Miss Flanagan now," I said. "I can't." "Why not?" "Well, because she's not here. If you need to speak with her, you can do that so at the weekly meeting this evening. It's in the rec room at dusk." Hang about for a whole day after what happened. Was she joking? Already fed up with this nonsense, I grabbed my phone and dialed a 999. 20 minutes later, a squad car pulled up outside the front gate, and then 2 officers, a male and a female, climbed out. "Yeah, I'm the one who called," I said through the bars. "I want to leave, but these people are holding me hostage." Behind me, the orderly muttered something into his radio before addressing the officers. "This is Mr. Donnelly, one of our residents." Getting really close to the gate, he whispered, "He's got dementia." "You lying son of a..." I snapped. Gently, he touched my arm. "Mr. Donnelly, you live here, remember? House 17. Do you need help finding your way back?" The officers exchanged a look as I swiped his hand away. "I don't have dementia. My name is Thomas Donnelly. I'm a 68-year-old. I'm perfectly capable of looking after myself, and I want to leave." "Mr. Donnelly, think carefully now." The orderly spoke in these same soft tones I used whenever my daughter got scared by thunder back in the day. "You live here now. It's 2022, you remember?" "I know what year it is." I pushed my chest right up against the gate and grabbed the male officer's collar through the bars. "These people are all crazy. There are claw marks in my lounge, and last night I found a body." Over my shoulder, the orderly said, "One of our beloved residents passed away last night. Mr. Donnelly's taken it pretty hard." Now, matching the guard's condescending tone, the male officer said, "Don't worry, we'll get things straightened out." That didn't exactly inspire me with confidence. All 4 of us went back and forth, me growing steadily more agitated. until Prisha, the nurse from before, wandered over, accompanied by 2 orderlies, Neck Acne and Potato Face. So far, she was the only person at Redburn who acted like a regular human being. I said, "Prisha, tell these people that I'm not senile." She gave a vacant stare, and then with zero compassion in her voice she said, "Come on, Mr. Donnelly, let's get you home. All this agitation won't be good for your heart." My stomach churned. Why had she called me Mr. Donnelly rather than Thomas? Her accomplices stepped forward, arms raised. I faced the officers again and said, "They've got to her as well." 4 hands seized me from behind, hooking into my armpits and around my waist. "Don't let these lunatics take me," I screamed, my anger giving way to panic. As the orderlies hauled me away, the female officer calmly called after us, "Mr. Donnelly, why don't you have a rest and see if you're feeling better tomorrow? If you're still upset, give us another call and we'll check everything's okay." My previous dismissal of Noelle as a basket case echoed bitterly in my mind. As the guards frog marched me down the street past other Redburn residents standing idle in their gardens or wandering aimlessly up and down the road, Neck Acne said, "You're quite the troublemaker, Mr. Donnelly. When Miss Flanagan hears about the fuss you've caused, she's not going to be happy." He snatched the mobile phone from my fanny pack before I could react. Unable to wrestle free, I said, "Who the heck are you people?" "We're the staff," answered the fat one. "And we're here to help." Back at my house, the guards dragged me through the hall and into the lounge, where they forced me onto the chair. Prisha offered me some pills from her nurse's case, which I knocked out of her hand and onto the floor. Those guys weren't pumping me with any drugs. Neck Acne dismissed her and Potato Face before turning toward the exit. "Why are you doing this?" I asked. "This is elder abuse." Grinning slyly, he peeked back over his shoulder. Yeah, take it up with Miss Flanagan." On his way toward the door, his eye happened across a picture of Mary. "This shelf, was it here before?" "No, I put it up. I know the idea of home maintenance is a frightening concept to your generation, but in my day, men knew how to fix things, and they respected their elders too." He studied the shelf for a moment, his bottom lip pushed out as if mildly impressed. "Don't cause any more trouble," he said and then slammed the door. Supported by the armchair, I stood with a heavy grunt and went over to the bookcase in the corner. On the 3rd shelf, the box containing my wife's antique cutlery sat open. For decades, that collection seemed so silly and pointless to me, but since the funeral, all of Mary's personal belongings, no matter how mundane, kept her fresh in my memory. I picked up a photo of us down by the beach. Letting my fingertips brush across her smiling face, I said, "How about all this, huh? Letting Laurel and frickin' Hardy push me around." My thoughts drifted back to the day that photo got taken, Mary's 23rd birthday, 1 year before Angela came along. On the way back from buying a couple of ice creams, I saw some weirdo smack my wife's backside. Within seconds, I had that guy flat on his back, his jaw permanently realigned 6 inches to the left. What the heck happened to me? My younger self would have scoffed at those 2 muppets. It was long past time somebody set these guys straight. At dusk, I pulled on a jacket and stormed over to the main building. Being outdoors so close to dark made me feel exposed and vulnerable, but I couldn't exactly barricade myself indoors. No way to reach the outside world. Who knew what those evil guys might have done? Halfway toward the main facility, that mangy cat blitzed across my path. I lifted one foot and then the other in a waltz, awkwardly trying not to crush the little fur ball. The feline stopped long enough to hiss at me. "Don't tell me you're going to start acting up as well," I said. It hissed again before disappearing beneath a nearby rosebush. Inside the main building, I trooped up to the front desk and slammed both fists against the counter. "Where is Miss Flanagan?" "Follow me," said a voice from behind. It belonged to Potato Face. He led me through a series of hallways, all large and luxurious, decorated in pastel shades of pleasant green. With every turn, I saw plaster flaking off the walls, or mold creeping up above skirting boards. There was a horrible stink of damp and mildew everywhere. Potato Face led me into a high-ceilinged room filled with several rows of foldable chairs split by a wide central aisle. A sea of old people had already gathered together. Orderlies and nurses stood in single file behind a podium on the far side of the gloomy crowd. "Well," I said to my chubby guide, "where is she?" "She'll be along any minute. Have a seat." I shuffled across the very back row past frail figures stooped over in their chairs. I sat between a lady with bloodshot eyes redder than a Massey Ferguson and a curly-haired fellow who had an oxygen tank plugged into his nostrils. None of the residents responded to any of my questions. They just sat idle like mindless zombies. After a few minutes of uncomfortable silence, the fluorescent lights above our heads dimmed as the far swung door opened, and then Miss Flanagan finally emerged. She had long, dark hair with a white streak through the middle, pulled into a bun so tight that it stretched the skin along her forehead taut. She stood at roughly my height, or thereabouts, and her sharp features reminded me of Angela's old porcelain dolls. Neck acne trailed behind her, eyes fixed on me. Taking her place behind the podium, Miss Flanagan said, "Good evening, everyone." A voice, as soft and soothing as a pillow, came out that hard, narrow mouth. The mob responded in perfect unison. "Good evening, Miss Flanagan." As she took a moment to adjust her notes, I pushed myself up, ready to demand answers. But then the lights went all the way out. Now I could see where Miss Flanagan's eyes, her shiny silver eyes. From beyond the veil of blackness, she said, "Repeat after me. The Redburn Retirement Village offers residents a wonderfully elegant and relaxed lifestyle in a beautiful environment." Those words hit like a thunderbolt. They seemed to bounce off the walls, echoing all around, rattling my bones. "Retirement Village offers residents a wonderfully elegant and relaxed lifestyle in," the crowd repeated. Once they finished, she had said, "The assisted living facility allows you to enjoy maximum independence but with a safety net of highly skilled nurses for emergencies, like cleaning, meals, and activities. Assisted living allows us to enjoy," they continued. Had I joined a freaking cult? Is that why they wouldn't let me leave? Were they gearing up for some Heaven's Gate crap? When she had rattled off the spiel, her lanky crony came down the aisle, barely visible in the gloom. Every time that Miss Flanagan spoke, her words seemed to creep along my throat. "Here, the staff ensures that even the smallest details receive our full attention." This made no sense. What made me want to copy her? Had these nutters slipped some kind of mind suppressant into my meds? Now desperate, I shoved past our other residents, rolling wheelchairs aside and knocking over metal walkers. "At Redburn, you won't just live. We won't just live. If anybody asks how you're doing, you'll tell them that you're as happy as can be. We're as happy as. You will act in service of Redburn. In service of Redburn." By the time that I got to the center aisle, Neck Acne was already there and waiting. He grabbed a hold of my shoulder. "Going somewhere, Mr. Donnelly?" Although I sorely wanted to deck the guy, my aged body couldn't take slugging it out with a younger man. Better to swallow my pride and live to fight another day. Just nip into the bathroom, old bladder. I forced a friendly chuckle. "I really think you should listen to the presentation." Quickly, he grabbed my other shoulder, so I spun toward the podium. My spine cracked from the pressure of him twisting my arms behind my back, forcing me in the direction of those dazzling eyes. My limbs got pressed almost to the point of dislocating. With every step forward, Miss Flanagan's words became fiercer, more intense. You are here to serve. We are here to serve, chanted the living dead. It took all of my self-control not to join them. Pushing his lips right up against my ear, the orderly said, "Look into her eyes. You will obey the staff here at Redburn." My head whipped wildly from one side to the other. "No, screw off." "You're bent on causing trouble, aren't you?" he said, frustrated. With that, he forced me past the podium, through the door that Miss Flanagan had arrived by. In a room with a filing cabinet, a wooden table with green chairs on either side, and another door on the far wall, Neck-Acne stood guard, refusing to answer any of my questions and ignoring my empty threats. From through the closed door, I heard the residents mindlessly chant along for several minutes, before slowly shuffling back into the hallway. The instant Miss Flanagan stepped into the room, I said, "Okay, what the heck's going on?" "Quiet," she said. There was a sudden traffic jam in my throat. Calmly taking a seat behind the table, Miss Flanagan said to her enforcer, "Well?" He fetched a case file from the cabinet and handed it to her. "This is Mr. Donnelly, the troublemaker that I warned you about. I think that he's immune." The way that her lips pursed as she studied the notes set my skin shivering. Locking her eyes on mine, she sharply said, "Sit." Obeying the order, my legs marched around the chair where they gave way. I couldn't climb back to my feet. I had become superglued to the cushion. "Well, not completely immune," she said. After glancing through the notes, she said to her assistant, "It must be the metal plate in his skull. If he's going to put up this much resistance, there's no sense keeping him around. If he calls the police again." With considerable effort, I pushed myself up off the chair and forced my lips apart. "No, hang on a sec. Sit back down." Immediately, my legs turned to slop, soft and mushy. She said, "Well, tell his family that he had a heart attack. He's fresh out of the hospital from a virus." "When are you going to do it?" he asked. Miss Flanagan's stomach grumbled. "Tonight." It took all my willpower to say, "What are you two clowns talking about? Heart attack? I'm healthier than an ox." "Look, I don't know." "Mr. Donnelly, you're burning up," she said, her voice dripping with impatience. The room immediately became a furnace. "Look, you're turning green." The pit of my stomach churned and twisted, and your pulse won't stop climbing. My heart thudded painfully in my chest. As she leaned forward across the table, those bright eyes locked onto mine. I can't remember the last time I saw a man look so sick. The word sick bounced around inside my skull. Darkness pressed tight against me. However, despite the haze, I continued protesting. Grasping the air like a drowning man, I rocked from side to side. "No, no." She conversed with Neck-Acne for a little while, her words too garbled for me to understand, until out of nowhere, that thick haze began to lift. Little by little, my strength returned. I could think clearly again. Had whatever drugs they had pumped me worn off? It didn't matter, because it seemed like they had planned on killing me before I could shine a spotlight on whatever insanity they had planned. Miss Flanagan leaned even further forward. Her yellow carrion breath tasted of expired meat, thick and pungent. Stuck in the chair, my final thoughts were of Mary, of her laying in a hospital bed, sickly pale, while the doctors explained all they could do now was make her comfortable. "Goodbye, Angela. I love you. Don't cry. I'm off to join your mother." As Miss Flanagan put her hand on the very edge of the table, it jerked awkwardly, momentarily throwing her off balance. After quickly recomposing herself, she pursed her lips, shot Neck-Acne a sharp look, and said, "I thought I told you to fix that dang wobble." "Sorry, ma'am," the assistant stammered, scared to meet her gaze. "We'll get somebody to look at it." She shot up and circled the desk, clearly agitated. Eyes fixed on the floor, Neck-Acne said, "What a shame Mr. Donnelly has to die. He's a bit of a handyman." "Die?" The word echoed in my mind. It felt weird to hear it said so casually. Miss Flanagan's forehead became one large, threatening wrinkle. What? Visibly flustered, he bent down and fumbled through the notes. Yeah, it says here that he worked construction for 30 years. When I went over earlier, he'd already put up a new shelf. She pushed her tongue into her cheek, completing this information. Change of plans. She quickly reached forward and grabbed both sides of my skull. You love it here at Redburn, Mr. Donnelly. You want to help us, don't you? Those giant eyes pierced my soul. Her words still had that compelling quality, only this time, the rest of the world didn't melt away. I could have spit in her face if I wanted to, but the squeaky wheel gets the oil. I needed to think smart. Maybe if I played along, they would let me go. At least for now. Making my face completely neutral, I said, Yes, I want to help. Good. Then tomorrow, Bernard here will give you a list of jobs that need to be done. You will obey his instructions and fix everything that he tells you to. My arms hung loosely at my sides while I nodded along. If anybody comes to check on you, be it your family or the authorities, you'll tell them that you've been feeling run down. You'll explain that you've been under the weather, but the staff here are doing everything to make you feel comfortable. After completing your assigned duties, you'll report back here at sundown. Do I make myself clear? Yes, Miss Flanagan. Good. And with that, she released me and got up and exited the room through the side door. Sinking into the chair, I quickly snatched air into my lungs. Immediately, my thoughts steered back to Angela, to Potato Face asking her to see Miss Flanagan before her. Had they pumped her full of drugs too? Maybe that's why she ignored my calls. Before I could get any of this straight in my mind, neck acne dragged me out of the room, through the main facility all the way back home, where he stuffed me through the front door and said, I'll see you tomorrow, bright and early. Yes, sir, I answered obediently. In the lounge, I collapsed onto the armchair. Those giant claw marks were still there. Where had they come from? And why were Miss Flanagan's eyes so dazzling? What had Miss Flanagan planned to do before her assistant had spilled the beans about my DIY skills? Drill a hole in my frontal lobe maybe, or offer me up as some ritual sacrifice. Well, in any case, I needed to get the heck out of Redburn. But how? I had no communication to the outside world. All the staff seemed somehow involved with this madness, and the place was a regular Fort Knox. As I sat there contemplating my limited options, the one-eyed cat jumped up onto the outside windowsill and brushed back and forth against the glass, meowing loudly. I glanced at Mary's picture up on the shelf, back to the noisy critter, and then reluctantly slid open the window. The furball strolled in like he owned the dang place. I poured a saucer of milk for him, followed by a glass of whiskey for me. A sadness unlike anything that I had ever felt before crashed over me like a wave. Until now, the notion of my own death had seemed like an event that couldn't come fast enough, always too far off, years, possibly even decades away. But now the big day had almost arrived. The meter was running, and that terrified me. I looked at Mary's photo for advice, and like always, she only smiled back. After licking its face clean, the purring cat jumped up onto my lap, curled into a ball and closed its single eye. Scratching its soft, warm belly, I let out a deep sigh. Fella, we're in some serious trouble. All night, I sat in that armchair, the mangy cat curled up on my lap. Every time that I closed my eyes, Miss Flanagan's silver ones flashed through my mind. Well, come sundown, I'd be seeing those horrible eyes again. First thing in the morning, neck acne pummeled the front door and gave me a list of things to do. I strapped on my tool belt, filled a duffel bag with drills and screwdrivers, and went from house to house, crossing off items like leaky taps and squeaky hinges, really dragging out every job, delaying my inevitable return to Miss Flanagan's house. The whole time, I acted like a stage hypnotist had placed me under a trance so that neck acne wouldn't get suspicious. In those marches between homes, the catwalk strum across these streets or halfway up trees. Was it my imagination, or did the little critter actually look concerned? In one house, a short lady with bottleneck glasses sat quietly listening to a radio turned to a golden oldie station. And wouldn't you know it, Rocket Man by Elton John came on right as I finished realigning her crooked picture frame. That song was playing the day that Mary and I first met. While taking a break from remodeling a kitchen, I had popped into a bakery for a quick scone. A lady behind the counter stood with her back to me. She reached over and turned up the volume on a nearby radio. Don't you just love Elton?" she asked as she turned around, really feeling the music. Even in a flimsy apron and cheap hairnet, she was the most gorgeous creature on planet Earth. Without the slightest idea who Elton was, I said, "He's the best." After 6 weeks of visiting that bakery almost every day, long after I had finished the kitchen and stopping by for a quick scone meant a 20-minute drive out of my way, I finally plucked up the courage to ask her for dinner. "What took you so bloody long?" was the response. By mid-afternoon, half the repairs were checked off. In a weird way, it felt nice to be useful again, despite the circumstances. In the main building, nurses spoon-fed residents cream pudding and mushy vegetables, as I flitted between rooms, tightening sink pipes, replacing bulbs, and refastening a ceiling fan that had come away from the plaster. With only a half hour until sundown, there was only one task left on my list: Miss Flanagan's wonky table. I followed neck acne into the little office where, before I could unpack my tools, Prisha came to confer with him privately. He said to me, "Fix that table and then stay put. I'll be back before dusk. Got it?" "Yes, sir." Finally, he had given me some breathing space. This was my chance, but where could I go? Orderlies patrolled the entire village, not to mention that gate. There had to be a phone somewhere. If I got my hands on some evidence these people were all deranged cultists, the police might not dismiss me as a crackpot again. My eyes scanned the room. In the filing cabinets, there was nothing but medical charts and case notes. The desk was mostly stuffed with Redburn flyers and admin paperwork. The heavy door in the corner wouldn't open, although that posed a little challenge to my combo multipurpose drill, and Angela said that I wouldn't need it. The loud screams of the divots made me cringe, terrified that an orderly might hear the racket and spoil my plan. Luckily, the sound went unnoticed. I lifted the handle away, took a deep breath, pushed open the door, and then stepped into a thick darkness, the only light coming from my torch. A cold draught seeped into my old bones as I searched the room. It was completely bare except for a large wooden box propped up against the far wall. An expert craftsman must have carved the whole thing. My fingers glided smoothly across the top. Only when I leaned forward and studied the object up close did it become clear what I had actually touched. A casket. My knees began to rattle. Why the heck would the Redburn staff keep that next to Miss Flanagan's office? Had they picked it out for me? As I reeled my hand away, my fingers must have nudged a latch, because all of a sudden, the lid shivered open several inches. 4 sharp fingers reached out of the narrow gap. "Who's there?" called a groggy voice from within, like someone who had been shaken awake. As the lid swung open with a horrible creak, I had to bite my bottom lip, otherwise I might have shrieked like Angela did when she was 6 and thought that there were monsters hiding in her closet. Miss Flanagan pulled herself out of the casket, except she looked different. She had a shrunken face, stretched taut over a well-defined skull, and nails like a fan of knives capping her bony hands. "Who's there?" she said, her voice carrying deep into the room. And as she spoke, I glimpsed a mouth stuffed with carved fangs whiter than porcelain. Before there was even time to gather my thoughts, her eyes, those dazzling silver eyes, opened wide. You, she snarled. Spinning away, I made a desperate break for the door. Miss Flanagan flew forward, collided with my back, and sent us both careening forward into the adjacent room, where her body flinched and spasmed. We had landed square in the middle of a square of light, thrown across the floor by the window on our left-hand side. Smoke billowed from Miss Flanagan's hands as she shielded the charred half of her face before recoiling into the shadow of the other room. Still gasping for air, I crawled over to the table and hoisted myself up. Flesh bubbled and burst across Miss Flanagan's wrists and palms, but not for long. Within seconds, as if by magic, her wounds healed themselves up. "Mr. Donnelly," she said sharply, "come here." My muscles locked up briefly. Not looking like her former human self, she beckoned me toward her with a single bony finger. Instead, I scrambled toward the door, snatching my tool bag along the way. She repeated the commands more forcefully each time, but whatever spell she had cast before had already been broken. Those sharp edges in her voice didn't touch me. "I'm going to tear open your throat and drink your insides," she screamed. That sentence chased me into the auditorium, where I slammed the door shut and paused to catch a breather. Okay, Miss Flanagan was a vampire. That meant vampires existed, and I was trapped inside an unescapable fortress with one. Things started making more sense. The residents weren't in a cult, they were puppets. The plate in my skull gave me some degree of immunity to her hypnotism, so she had decided to bump me off. But how did any of this help? Even if there was a way to contact the outside world, nobody would ever believe me. Neck acne came through the door on the opposite side of the room. "What's all the racket?" he shouted, and then, "You were supposed to wait for me, get back in there." "What, that thing? Not a chance." Neck acne had a good 6 inches on me, and me a good 40 years on him, but still, I couldn't let him offer me up like an appetizer. Hands quivering, I fumbled through my tool belt as he came forward. When there were only a few meters between me and the lanky guy, I held up a canister of WD-40 and I sprayed it into his sunken eyes. Immediately, he gave a shrill squeal and dropped to his knees, hands pressed tight against his leaky eyes. I hurried out into the corridor before he had a chance to recover. Casually strolling past orderlies and nurses so as to not make them suspicious, I made my way through the maze of halls. 2 bends later, I happened across Potato Face, who said, "Weren't you supposed to wait in Miss Flanagan's office?" "May I change of plans?" I replied, my voice all nervous. "The boiler in the basement needs repaired." Let me check that with." From my belt, I grabbed a rubber mallet and swung it in a fierce, downward arc. As it collided with nothing but groaning, a sound escaped the man's mouth like a chipmunk huffing helium. He keeled forward with a faint whimper. Just a few steps from the front entrance, a 2-note alarm began to blare. Receptionist went into a frenzied panic while I continued outside at a brisk pace. Above my head, the sky fumed with orange and red clouds. Vampires could come out after sundown, but there was nothing stopping the Redburn staff from coming after me. Given my advancing age, I needed a head start. I grabbed a hammer from my bag and tapped a nail into the frame, pinning the door shut. Now they would have to go all the way around back. What next? They patrolled the front gate and I would break my neck climbing the fence. So seeing no other choice, I hurried home. Halfway down the street, the cat blitzed out from behind a willow tree and followed me along, meowing nonstop as he followed me into my house. The sun had already half-dipped beneath the horizon, but never mind, Mr. Dracula. Those dang orderlies had a spare key in case of emergencies. With the speed and vigor of a man half my age, I disassembled the kitchen furniture, harvested wooden boards, and haphazardly nailed them across all the doors and ground floor windows. Before sealing the final one in the lounge, I glanced down at my furry companion. "Trouble's on the way, little fella. Last chance to make a break for it." He gave me a blank stare. "Suit yourself." Taking advantage of those last few minutes of daylight, I wrote Angela a note. Would she ever read it? Probably not, but still. There were some things that needed to be said. Darling, always know that I love you. I'm so proud of you and the kids. You've got all the best qualities of me and your mother. Don't be sad, because now I'm with her again. Love, Dad. Outside, the sun finally slipped beneath the horizon. Either Miss Flanagan or her band of merry men would arrive any second now. Altogether, every light fixture in the house went out. I peeked through the narrow gap between two boards and saw orderlies and nurses positioned along the street, arms by their sides. Neck Acne and Potato Face stood just beyond the hedge. Why didn't they try breaking in yet? 5 seconds later, a silhouette passed above their heads, draping the group in a huge shadow. A moment later, glass shattered somewhere upstairs. By my feet, the cat's hair stood on end as though receiving an electrical shock. I think that he regretted not making a hasty escape when he had the chance. I scooped him into my arms. Upstairs, floorboards creaked and groaned as something traveled through the bedroom into the hallway. The ceiling seemed to breathe, creaking like my old joints. Outside, the Redburn staff closed in on the house, chanting in perfect unison. Here at Redburn Village, we work hard to ensure all residents enjoy their retirement in a relaxed, peaceful environment. Teeth chattering, I slowly shuffled into the hall and stood at the foot of the stairs. In my arms, the cat trembled fiercely, forcing me to continually readjust my grab. Our assisted living facilities enable you to enjoy maximum independence, but with a safety net of highly skilled nurses available 24 hours a day, offering you and your loved ones complete peace of mind. A long twisted shadow engulfed the upstairs landing. Were those wings? My feet became blocks of cement as the shadow morphed, gradually becoming more human. And then Miss Flanagan appeared and said, "Tisk, tisk, tisk, Mr. Donnelly. Whatever are we going to do with you?" Her eyes flicked toward my hands. "And look, you've got vermin with you. I could have sworn that I disposed of that flea bag months ago." That sent the furball into overdrive. After wrestling free of my grip, he bolted down the hall and into the kitchen. Really taking her time with every step, Miss Flanagan let her fingers scrape across the wall, etching in deep marks. "What's going on?" I shouted. "What is this place?" She chuckled. "Well, this is Redburn, the greatest retirement home in Ireland. Ask any of our residents." At the raise of her hands, the chants grew louder. "It's a glorious place to wake up each morning. Cozy, friendly, warm. It's a glorious place to wake up each morning. Cozy, friendly, and warm." "So you go around hypnotizing the elderly to do your bidding. Is that it? Are you raising some sort of demon clan?" She threw her head back and cackled. "Please, I simply need to feed." "Feed?" Halfway down the steps, as she paused. "I've been alive for thousands of years, Mr. Donnelly. For centuries, I've traveled to Eastern Europe feeding on peasants, but you humans are a suspicious bunch, always running me out of your towns and villages sooner or later. Even in the big cities, there was only so long that I could last before the ground shrunk beneath my feet. So I had an idea. A retirement home. People die in those all the time. Rather than feed on humans who had aroused suspicion, I could simply pick off ones who already had one foot in the grave. They aren't as tasty, but angry mobs don't pick up a torch or pitchforks when they die. That's sick. Oh, please, she snorted. And then her eyes happened to cross a picture of Mary mounted on the wall. "Tell me, is this Mrs. Donnelly?" I uncomfortably shifted from one foot to the other. "Well, good news. The two of you are about to be reunited." She glided down the stairs, in a movement so smooth I almost didn't notice it until it was already too late. At the very last second, I rushed into the lounge and slammed the door shut. Through the door, Miss Flanagan shouted, little pig, please let me in." I had to do something, but what? All they had were my tools and Mary's antique cutlery. Wait. The door crashed open with enough force to dent the wall, and then Miss Flanagan entered the dim room, her fangs bared. Quickly, I grabbed the torch from my pack, flicked on the beam, and took aim. My attacker leapt to the ceiling with frightening grace. I tried to pin her down, following the sounds of claws chipping away at the ceiling, but she was too fast. The best that I could manage were brief glimpses of silver eyes. Judging from all the laughter, she quite enjoyed our little game of cat and mouse. With her hands hooked into claws, Miss Flanagan lunged at me from the corner of the room. Her nails pinwheeled across my face, opening red stripes across my forehead and cheek, just as I got the beam angled correctly. There was a sound like bacon sizzling on the grill as we both spun onto the floor. The torch whirled around toward the far side of the room outside of reach. Miss Flanagan grimaced. Black smoke billowed from her forehead while I fumbled through my belt, found a pair of pliers, pushed myself to my knees, and then pinched them close around her right fang. With every last drop of old man strength in my body, I pulled, squeezed, and twisted. Blinded by rage, Miss Flanagan thumped me in the chest with more force than a sledgehammer. I experienced a moment of complete weightlessness, brought crashing to an end by the back of my skull hitting the shelf, the same one that decorated with Mary's things. Black dots swirled in front of my eyes as I spilled to the floor. A single fang was still pinched between my pliers. Already recovered from her burns, Miss Flanagan probed the gap in her mouth, using a long tongue that tapered off into a fine point. Her eyes narrowed. "You made a big mistake, Mr. Donnelly. Just for that, I'm gonna hunt down your entire family. You've got a daughter and some bratty grandchildren, right? Oh, it's been so long since I've had a decent meal. You have no idea. I'm gonna rip their throats out and pull out their guts in steaming bundles. But first..." Her jaw popped open like a trapdoor. Without warning, Miss Flanagan sprung forward and seized my neck, her warm tongue dragging along my cheek, a tentacle probing every inch of exposed flesh. A lone fang hovered inches above my throat. I felt powerless to stop it. This was the end. 40 years earlier, I still wouldn't have stood a chance. But then, a blurred, hissing object collided with the side of her head. The cat. The little critter latched onto Miss Flanagan, frantically slashing her horrible face. She whirled around, attempting to pry the brave little critter off, but its claws were embedded way too deep. Dark blood seeped out of her forehead and throat as the cat carved out patterns of diagonal gashes. The pair waltzed around, banging into walls and tipping over the bookshelf, which made Mary's antique cutlery set crashed onto the ground and emptied its contents across the floor. All those tools, each made from pure silver, lay agonizingly close, but my muscles burned with age and fatigue. As the world turned all blurry, possibly from a concussion, the orderly's chant sounded far in the distance. "At Redburn, you won't just live. You won't just live." Above my head, the shelf gave way. Even expert workmanship couldn't withstand a collision with a fellow my size. A picture of Mary toppled onto my lap. The muscles in my arms twanged wildly as I grabbed the photo and kissed her cheek. "I'm so sorry, darling. I couldn't save them. I love you." My eyelids closed over, ready to embrace the end. But then, for the first time since she had passed, I heard Mary's voice, loud and angry. "Are you freaking kidding me, Thomas?" I opened my eyes. "Did I accidentally marry some lazy bum who'd take this kind of crap? Didn't you hear her? That monster's gonna eat our grandbabies. Get off your butt, you lazy son of a gun." Before me, the furball held on as best it could, hissing and fighting and tearing deep into Miss Flanagan's lips. Well, if you could stand up to a vampire, so could I. Time to dust away the cobwebs from these old bones. With memories of Mary fresh in my mind, I reached forward and fumbled through her antique cutlery. Forks and spoons, nothing but freaking forks and spoons. Toward the bottom of the pile, though, I found a knife, finally. But would it be sharp enough to get the job done? Only one way to find out. Out in the hall, something hefty like Potato Face hurled itself against the front door while other red-burned staff rattled and drummed the windows. Bony talons reached between boards and swiped at the air. Now their mistress felt threatened. They wanted in. "You won't just live. You won't just live." The drill lay close by. I grabbed some wire from my pack while Miss Flanagan successfully pried the cat off her face and hurled him against the side wall. That beautiful critter collided with a dull thump, fell onto the floor, and then flipped itself right side up. As I worked, Miss Flanagan dropped onto all fours, her snout elongating. Every inch of exposed flesh became black and furry. Fingers webbed themselves together in leathery skin, connected her underarms with her back. That was the limit for my little ally, who blitzed out of the room, at which point the bat creature refocused its attention on me. Grunting heavily, I stood, armed and ready. In that moment, the clock rolled back 30 years. I was a young buck in his prime. A blast of hot air from two powerful nostrils blasted me in the face. With a single flap of her wings, Miss Flanagan flew across the room, seized me by the chest and rose up into the air, and then slammed us onto the brutal, unforgiving floor. The creature weighed more than a dang Ford Escort. The very second that we landed that horrible phase, it began reverting to human form. Only this time Miss Flanagan looked thinner, more delicate. As she glanced down at her torso, her eyes opened wider than dinner plates. Stabbed into her midsection was the end of my power drill, onto which I had tied the knife. She dropped us with such force the blade had punctured a hole in her side. Still flat on my back, I squeezed the trigger. The drill met some resistance and rotated slowly, gradually tearing apart Miss Flanagan, before quickly picking up speed. As she rolled over, the tremendous pressure against my lungs eased. Outside, the chants trailed off mid-word and the rattling had stopped. Blotting out the pain, I found my feet and grabbed the torch from the far side of the room. "No, please," Miss Flanagan rasped, powerless to do anything beside rotate her silver eyes toward me. I pointed the torch directly at her face, took 3 deep breaths, and then said, "Let this be a lesson to you. Never threaten a man's family." At the flick of the switch, she exploded into flames. The embers kicked up a large cloud of dry dust that went everywhere, and when the beast was finding nothing more than a pottery stain, I collapsed into the armchair. The entire world took a deep breath and sighed. I heard Miss Flanagan's mindless army groan outside, all deeply confused about how they had got there. The cat limped into the room, one paw curled up against his chest. I gently scooped him into my lap. A photo of Mary lay in the center of the room, and now she almost seemed to be smiling. In my mind's eye, I heard her sweet, sweet laugh, and suddenly, for the first time since her diagnosis, I found myself laughing too. As a group of residents and I strolled through the front gate, we waved at the burly attendant. "How was the view from the summit?" he had asked us. "Worth the effort," one of my companions had called back. Since the encounter, the staff at Redburn and all of its inhabitants had been much more agreeable, livelier. So far as I could tell, Miss Flanagan's trance lifted the instant she had died. Everybody woke up from a sort of terrible dream once they couldn't remember much about it. After a few weeks, since nobody had the slightest idea where the former boss had disappeared to, a new manager took over, and things became a lot more fun around here. Down the street, as I parted ways with the group, one of my friends said, "Hey, I'll see you for poker tonight then." "Absolutely," I replied. "Might be a little late though. Angela's bringing the grandkids over. They've got some new Nintendo that they want to show me." Back home, the one-eyed cat skulked around my garden, meowing impatiently, one paw heavily bandaged. It looked at me as if to say, "Hey, it's almost noon, where's my lunch?" All right, I said, chuckling. Shortly after becoming a vampire killer, I had rushed the cat to a vet who had wrapped up its busted leg and promised me that she would be okay. That sure caught me off guard. In the kitchen, I emptied a tin of cat food into a bowl. Etched along the outer edge was the name that I had christened my new companion, the most beautiful one that I could think of, Mary. And that, my friends, is how I rediscovered a new zest for life by checking into a retirement home. So, if you're around Dublin and looking for a place that'll let you enjoy an elegant lifestyle in a tranquil environment, with a safety net of highly skilled nurses available 24 hours a day, have I got the place for you. And trust me, at Redburn, you won't just live, you'll live to the fullest.